pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everybody. Mr. Manzies, if I call you Bill?
Bill is fine. Yes, Bill is fine, yes.
Dave, Jackie, and Liz.
Okay.
We're expecting Mike Phelan to show up shortly.
Okay.
And then I think you've met Ed Cawley previously, and here's Mike now. Mike, this is William Manzi.
How you do? How are you? Did you get this that I tried emailing you today?
Yeah. Yes, I didn't get a chance to read it.
All right, I'm proud of myself then if you got it.
This is all okay by the attorneys and stuff?
Yeah, that one came in from Joe Fair.
Okay.
You got it?
Get a couple copies of it?
Yeah.
Was Rich? Okay. It's just a release for looking at references that we got from our town attorneys.
Okay.
Well, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Southampton's a small town. It's a small town.
Yes.
It's only about 6,000 residents. And obviously, a lot of what goes on in town is by volunteers, including us. Back in the day, when I was first came in as a selectman in '04, it didn't seem so complex. It seemed pretty simple. And we had an administrative assistant, Brenda, and it seemed like everything was functioning okay. The state came in and they did an audit and they recommended a few things. One was a town administrator and to make certain positions appointed. When was that? Who came in? It was the DOR came in.
2005.
Yeah, very good. And so we pursued the town administrator position, and lo and behold, we ended up with Ms. Schindler, and she's now moved on to Orange. And the experience with Ms. Schindler was that, wow, look at this. This is now from a Model T moving on to a lease somewhere in the 70s. I mean, we were actually feeling like we were going places, the grant writing and whatnot. And again, getting back to volunteers, we just don't have the time to actually, for the day-to-day functions, as complex as they have now become, how competitive out of 353 towns of Massachusetts, trying to compete for the shrinking money that's out there for projects.
Yes.
So we like having a town administrator, and we look forward to having a town administrator full-time again, as Reggie has been the interim town administrator. So having said that, I just have to ask a question, is why Southampton?
We talked about it with the initial committee, and at that point, they asked me if I had applications anywhere else, and I did not. I've been in the private sector since I left the job of mayor of Methuen, and I'm relatively happy there, but I want to get back into administration, municipal administration. It is the thing I love to do the best. Believe it or not, because there were a lot of headaches involved in municipal administration. Southampton, when I saw the position open, I thought it would be a good fit for me. As I mentioned to you earlier, I'm an Amherst graduate. I love the region. I can't say that I've spent a lot of time in Southampton proper, but I love the region, and I always used to tease my wife that my real goal in life was to get a administrator's job in Western Mass, and we would argue a little bit about that. But so when I saw that opportunity, I thought that it would be a good fit, and I've been out of administration for a little over a year, and I did want to get back in, and I thought I could add some value to Southampton.
So there was a term limit, from my understanding.
There was a term limit in Methuen. It's 3 two-year terms by charter.
Okay.
That's just your setup for tonight.
I'm sorry, excuse me, that's Liz, Steve.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're learning new techniques here. I apologize for interrupting.
No problem at all.
So there was a term limit.
There was, yes, three three two-year terms in Methuen by charter is the maximum. Actually switched over from a town manager form.
Okay.
And we went through, though I'm a little, believe it or not, I'm a little young for some of that changeover. They went from selectmen to an administrator with a 21-member town council. Huge, and it is just as chaotic as you might have thought it would be, to a town manager with a 9-member town council. And then from that point in 91 and 92, by vote of the local electorate, they converted to an elected mayor.
I had a question, just, I was listening to what you were saying as I meant to write something down. Okay, so you've looked at possibly being here. When you were in Methuen as, as mayor, what would you say were some of the more difficult things that you had to make decisions about?
When I was the mayor, starting in January 2006, the financial calamity that hit the country hit municipalities, localities throughout Massachusetts. And probably for me, the most difficult thing that I had to get through was keeping the city afloat, trying to meet the need to continue services, and strike labor deals that would allow us to do that.
Did you reopen contracts during that period of time?
I was fortunate in that as the financial distress came, contracts were very close to coming to an end. So when you look at the resume, it says there were over 30 collective bargaining agreements. And one of the reasons that is because I kept striking, there's 9 city-side unions. I did the negotiating myself. We didn't let the lawyers in the room, and that's why we achieved success. But with all due deference. But
I didn't raise my hand.
You didn't even flinch.
So what we did there was we struck a continuing set of one-year agreements. Now, in 2 of the most difficult years, and including public safety, we got 3 public safety unions to agree to give back 10% of their pay in order to forestall layoffs. And that happened for 2 consecutive years. It was worth $3.6 million to the community, and it was how we kept afloat.
How much is Methuen's budget per year?
At that time, it was about $130 million. It's probably up to 135, 136 now.
So you know our budget's about 14?
Yes, yes, I do.
I'm really struggling with the pennies.
Yeah. Every penny counts.
Yeah, it does count here. So what would you say is one of the largest failures you had, looking back?
I think that there were a lot of successes. I don't know that there were any notable failures. Just a difficult climate in some respects, because even though I'm happy to tell you about the successes with the collective bargaining agreements, they weren't easily had. In the first year, I had to issue layoff notices to 30 firefighters and 30 police officers. Now, I pulled those back, but during the course of that time, and they were all my friends, but there were some pretty difficult times with the labor unions then, and some pretty hard bricks thrown in my direction. But we stayed the course, showed them that we were serious about doing what we needed to do to protect the community, and they came back to the bargaining table and gave us what we needed. So it was a difficult point in time for sure.
And it sounds like you're more of kind of a hands-on approach when dealing with, you're talking about the unions. There's not a lot of staff here. It's very direct in dealing with individuals in a small town like this.
In Methuen, obviously vast differences, as you point out, between the budgets, but City Council cut a lot of my staff during the time that we're talking about. So I went 2.5 years without an economic development director, struck some of the biggest economic development deals without one that the city has seen in quite some time. I actually compiled a tax rate without an assessor in 1 year. And we got a lot of stuff done with myself and my chief of staff doing the work directly. So, yes, I'm hands-on, and I'm somewhat used to it.
Mike, do you have any questions?
Well, the obvious difference is 47,000 to barely 6,000.
Yes.
130 million to 14 million, of which one time we figured it out, we barely control about $2 million after you
No,
take
I think it's almost, well, maybe it's 2.25.
2.25 million that we really control
After the schools.
after the schools. Half that 14 million goes to schools, and the other half goes to obvious necessities. So I think one day we sat down and figured out there was about $2 million in discretionary spending in there. So there's a big difference between being a city mayor, which out here would be a big city mayor for 47,000 people. You'd be a city about the size of Hoyoke, one of our neighbors, and coming out here where we herd cows and shovel streets.
It's not that bad.
I'm not painting it as a bad picture necessity. We all live here because of
Shoveling a
it.
street, or do you get Ed to do it? Ed does it.
I do it with my snowblower in front of the house, because we're the last ones on the road. But big difference, you know, and when you come out here and you may be used to saying do that and we're going to do this. Out here it's more like we'll try to do that and we'll see if we can get somebody to do that. More properly referred to as herding cats.
Herding cats, right. We discussed it in the first interview.
And you have to understand, we weren't privy to
Mike
those.
and I were sort of out of that.
Yeah, and so they were good enough to allow me to address it, and I appreciated the fact that I was allowed to address that. As I said, Southampton isn't the only position that I've applied for. I applied in another small community, and as I went to that community, it was actually while I was still the mayor. I get out there and I met with a wonderful board. Chief of police was there, and they said to me, Mayor, why do you want to come to a community this small? You're used to different way of doing things, and I'm eager to get back into administration. I do believe that I can acclimate myself with no problem whatsoever to and I recognize fully the differences. The differences are vast, and it's not a mayor form. It's a role that I see as subservient to the board, carrying out the policy directives of the board, working with the board to get the marching orders, and then to the best of my ability carry them out. So I recognize the difference. I know that people say, well, geez, why would he be here with such a vast difference in budget and size, but I think I can add value.
And a lot less power and authority.
Yeah, the power and authority, quite honestly, is a double-edged sword, and sometimes the sword is pointed the wrong way. So I'm more than happy to cede power and authority under this form where it belongs, to the board.
And I'm always struck by people who come in and say, well, and I quote your letter, 6 budgets, no layoffs. Why is no layoffs so important?
Well,
We've got dead wood, doesn't it need to go?
yes, it does. And I think that in that case, we were able to do something that I dare say hasn't been done at all in the Commonwealth, and that is, I was interested as the executive in not seeing the type of layoffs that I had put out there. Methuen has 4 fire stations. I was going to consolidate it to 1. Methuen's proactive policing, which has helped in areas that border Lawrence, was going to be decimated by a layoff of 30 folks. So when you look at our staffing there, and I went in and I reviewed it, you would find that Methuen is not a community that had a lot of extra staff. I know you hear that from everybody, but one of the things I can tell you is that when I left office as mayor, Methuen had the single highest on a percentage basis unused levy capacity in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we did not spend money. We put it into this so-called Proposition 2.5 buffer, and we did not tax for it. And again, number one in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts on a percentage basis. So I'm very proud of that. And I think that in the area of public safety, the community and the city council did not want the layoffs. I agreed in that case.
But why not the layoffs? I'm always confused. We come down and we get to a budget situation and we say we've got people that have to go.
Yep.
And municipal government's the only place that it goes to, we don't want to lay off anybody.
I don't think that's always the right approach, so I'm not disagreeing with you. I think
And I'm not voting for layoffs, by the way.
in the case of Methuen, it was particularly going to hit public safety, and we have some public safety issues, but to go from 4 fire stations to 1 in a city that's geographically large, in my opinion, was not going to be good for the community. Now, the other thing to remember here is that, to go to your question, you could take it 2 ways. You could say, well, we don't want to lay off, so let's go out and ask the public for an override. But I didn't do that. I put them back with their money, which has not been done yet in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I used their money to keep them on the job, and that was the deal that we struck. I thought it was a good deal for the community, and we were able to fund those 30 folks again by getting them to give that 10% back. By the way, the administration was forced to take it as well. So for 2 years, I took $8,000 straight cash cuts to my salary as mayor. I gave the city back $16,000.
That's my point. There's no God-given right to a raise, and we get into that with a lot of the unions and the employees that, well, I've been here a year, I need a raise, or I'm entitled to a raise. Somebody has to say no.
I agree. I agree, particularly when the money isn't there to fundraisers, and so it's a fine line you walk, but I've negotiated successfully. 30, I have to tell you, I left 9 behind that were not ratified. Those 9 were ratified about 3 months later. So the current mayor brought them forward without a change in comma. And so there's really 39, and 6 one-year health deals as well. We struck them on a one-year basis. We're a Section 19 community, so all of the employees, including the teachers, negotiate together, and they negotiated with me, and we struck 6 one-year deals. And to go back, I won't belabor it, but the second-to-last deal raised co-pays and deductibles substantially. We're a 62-38 split in Methuen, which is extraordinary.
For the copay or?
No, it's not for the copay, that's the percentage break between for the premium, yes.
One other question. You mentioned that Methuen, you managed to get the lowest percentage levy.
Unused levy capacity, highest in Massachusetts on a percentage basis.
Did you happen to look and see where we are in this town?
There's not a lot of unused levy capacity.
So we could use a manager such as yourself. Somehow I knew that was the answer to the question.
But I asked you brought up Prop 2.5 buffer. What is that? What do you consider?
Prop 2.5.
You call it a Prop 2.5 buffer.
Well, in this case, it's unused levy.
That's what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. It would be unused levy capacity under Prop 2.5.
I mean, to put things in proper perspective, you had how many fire stations?
4.
We have 4 bays in ours.
Yes.
And it's only about 100 years old.
Yeah, we're putting the base, yeah.
And the back wall's caving in, so maybe you can help us with.
Yikes.
Any other questions?
No, that would be my question.
Jackie, do you have any
Yeah, I'm
questions?
ready. Hello
Hi,
again.
nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I was wondering, how do you approach the planning process? What systems do you use to set objectives and priorities? For instance, I've been on this board for 2 years, so I know nothing works quickly. You have to be patient in this field. But, we have a lot of things on our agenda and projects that we have to get through, and we have budgets that are very tight, so it's hard to start new projects. And I'm just wondering, how would you try and help us to get some of these projects through?
I think that planning, sometimes folks make it more complicated than it needs to be. While I was the mayor, one of the things that I ran on, and it was people were insistent on, we had not done a new master plan in over 20 years. And it was something that, while everybody said they wanted it generically, when you got into the nuts and bolts, that wasn't necessarily true, because we also rewrote the entire zoning ordinance for the community. Now, I didn't rewrite the zoning ordinance. What we did was, we went out, solicited input, and had meetings all throughout the community. And I was there to listen. We had a master plan committee, and we met and we formulated a battle plan based on the input that we got. So, in this case, to go directly to your question, everything is reliant on the budget and the priorities that folks set, but there are ways to plan, and I think that planning is the best thing that you can do for your community. Laying out where you want to be next year, but laying out where you would like to be in 5 years, laying out where you'd like to be in 10 years, and going through that process, and then putting the things into a priority list that you folks think are important, or that the citizens think is important, and then going out and trying to get them. So it's not impossible, it's difficult sometimes, and of course finances constrain, as we all know, so there's no easy solution. Sometimes it's about making difficult choices, and those choices can be politically grueling for boards, but in the end, they have to be made. And so things can get accomplished, but maybe not everything.
Right.
And we set priorities, and we try to lay it out so that they're achievable, and we know what bowling pins we're going to knock down in what year.
Right, thank you. We do, in fact, have a master plan. It was well done, we're very excited about it. Yeah, we just have to find a way to make those things happen, you know,
Just past the town
budgets.
meeting.
Took us, how long, 3 years?
Yeah, about that.
For a commissioner study?
No, we have a.
You have a
The
plan,
plan was
okay.
adopted at town meeting
All right.
last
Yeah.
last week.
Last week.
Right.
Okay.
Excellent.
It started in the other town hall. It was finally completed. Any other questions, Jim?
Yeah, I just have another one more. What is important to you in establishing, affecting working relationships with others and boards, you know?
I think that it goes to, maybe to the earlier question, and that is to not just be available, but to try to talk with folks to see what their priorities are, what problems they've had. As an administrator, is there something that the office can do to be helpful with a problem that maybe hasn't been communicated, or that there has been a little bit of a lack of a communication? So I think that the best way that I've found is to talk to people. And if you talk to people and you're available to people, and they know that you're actually listening instead of looking at them, then I think that helps. And it gets to the point where they know that you understand what the problems are. And if you can take those problems to the board or try to solve them yourself, that I think is the best way to establish both trust, communication, and a two-way dialogue that can do nothing but help everybody, including the boards.
Thank you.
Hi, how are you? So I'm just wondering if you could tell us about a time when you had to support a decision that maybe you didn't completely agree with.
It's a little different in a mayor form, because while there's a legislative body there, the CEO is a separate branch. So if the city council did something that I didn't like, unlike a board of selectmen who has authority over the administrator, I didn't necessarily have to go along with it. So to be honest with you, there were several notable, as there always will be in mayor-council relationships, several notable ups or downs. One of the last things that happened was we had push through a high school project. We did that $100 million project without benefit of a debt exclusion or a Prop 2.5 override. So in pushing forward that finance plan to the city council, the city council agreed that we would set aside to smooth out some short-term debt issues. We agreed to put aside a certain amount of money each year into a special reserve fund, which they did, and as we came to a budget, they were not going to pass my budget. They told me on the floor at a very late hour that they would not pass the budget. And their solution was to go into the reserve fund. And it was an attempt to mitigate or lessen what they considered to be an overly high tax rate increase. At that point, it was under $100, and again, we were still, at that point, $3.5 million below the levy limit, doing a high school project without a debt exclusion. I did not agree. But as we came to the 11th hour, and we were, I don't know if it was June 27th, both sides were dug in. And in this business, you cannot always have things all your own way, even if you're a man. So I went out on the floor and I said to them in open session, I will offer up X amount of dollars. It's a one-time deal. Come get it while the door is open, and either you take it or the government's going to shut. And they took it. Now, I didn't agree with it, but it's one of those things that in government we don't do enough of. I didn't see it their way. They didn't see it my way. So we went out and I gave up some of the reserve fund, which quite honestly, I will tell you now, was not the correct decision. I said it to the public, I don't agree, but in order to facilitate, I did it. I still would tell you it was the wrong decision, but that's the way it goes. It's just what I needed to do to get a budget through, and for the larger good, I offered some of the money up.
So are you saying that you are an advocate of education? If you had to move the budget closer to the schools, or?
I'll be honest with you, in Methuen, we did not have the disputes that other communities have had between schools and the city. I worked very hard, and over there I was also the chairman of the school committee. Now, notwithstanding that, I tried to work very hard, both with the committee members and with the superintendent, so that we could agree on finances. But having said that, Methuen only gave the minimum state allocation under education reform during my 6 years. We did not give over that. Many of the communities in the Merrimack Valley give over the minimum. We did not, and the schools, to their credit, work to make that sort of be okay, and they did. Not to say there weren't bumps in the road, there always are, but yeah, I favor education, and I think it's maybe the most important thing we do as public officials, but we all have to work together to try to get to a point where there's a balance, and in Methuen, at least, I was able to do that just by reaching out to the superintendent, spending time with her, spending more time than I wanted to with the business manager. That was time that I didn't want to spend either, but I did. And so we came to what I thought was a good consensus without all of the, you've seen some pretty tough battles between city and school sides, and we avoided that while I was there, I'm happy to say.
Liz, do you have any other questions?
I just wonder what you would hope to accomplish in the first year here.
It's a great question, and I think that it's one of the things I would say to you is that rather than telling you I have a list of things that I want to come here and do, I would like to come to the board and sit in a planning session and have the board say to me, this is where we think we need help, this is what we think you ought to focus on, and as we discuss that, if I think there should be something added, or if I think a priority is askew, I will mention it, but In the end, the board would give me the marching orders that you think are appropriate for the community, that the citizens think is appropriate, and then I either do it or I fail. And if I fail, then
Thank you.
thank you.
All right. Bill, so you got questions for us?
I just had the question I had you answered, and that was on the master plan. So I wasn't aware that the master plan was there, and that was the question that I had. So
We do have a master plan and fully adopted on last Tuesday evening.
excellent.
I have a question, and we didn't have a residency requirement in our job description.
Yep.
But it's a long haul from Methuen out here.
Yes, it is.
And we are noted for having our sudden emergencies out here,
Yes.
such as blizzards and the creeks rising and roofs leaking on sudden basis.
Yes.
And while we have good people who head departments, there may come a time when we need, the director needs to be here.
I would, in the short term, say that I'll be here, I would be here for the week. And as far as emergencies go, I had several in Methuen. I couldn't agree more. Without the person in charge day-to-day there, it's a problem, and the ship tends to sort of float off course. I was greeted by the May floods in 2006. I had to evacuate and do a whole series of things that weren't pleasant. We were greeted by ice storms a couple of years later. I had to evacuate the Methuen Housing Authority under order because they lost power, and put all the elderly folks into one of our schools. So I agree, emergencies, you need the administrator there, and I will be here.
And I have one other question. While they were talking about schools, it's one of the questions I wanted to bring up when I was talking, but you know, of course, we're a regional school district
Yes,
on the high school level, and we're a local school district on...
1 through 6.
1 through 6 is a local school district, and then
Yep.
you have another school board for the regional. But we've been put, that we have the Northampton, or the Hampshire County governments is always advocating for regionalization of certain services, including boards of health, I'm trying to think of all the other ones that have come by us lately.
Building inspector.
Building inspector,
Dispatch.
dispatch, and those sorts of things. I would assume in Methuen you don't have any, you probably don't have experience with the regionalization.
No, on the contrary, a lot of experience. I was a co-founder in 2006 of the Merrimack Valley Mayors Managers Coalition, which went from the coast all the way down to Lawrence. And we were also a founding member of the regional dispatch effort that is actually underway now. And our fire chief and our police chief were members of that group. Essex County has now created a regional dispatch system. Now, I'm loath to say that Methuen is not a part of it, because despite my recommendation and despite my showing that there was going to be an enormous savings to the community, the city council did not vote for it, despite the fact that we helped create the entity. So I am acquainted with it up in our area. There is on the coast, Amesbury, Newburyport, and Salisbury entered into a compact on health. It eventually got winnowed down to 2. I believe Newburyport pulled out. But I'm very familiar with regionalization, and Merrimack Valley Planning Agency, where that coalition meets monthly, still is a big advocate for regionalization and those types of efforts.
Mike, I don't know how to go about this, so if you're okay with that, we do have an audience here today.
Yes.
And one of the things we want to do is to maybe pose some questions from the public that's here. I would just ask that whoever asks a question to identify themselves and their address and speak loudly so we could hear you and be picked up on the microphone. So we'll just go down the line. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, I'm John Sheehan, Pomeroy Meadow Road. Welcome to Southampton.
Thank you.
Mr. Manzi, as you heard discussion about the huge disparity about the size of Methuen and the government, the population compared to Southampton, and being in a small town, they raise the question of working relationship. A small pebble in a pond makes big waves in a small town. I believe you had some problems with the police chief.
Yes.
One of the key employees in your town. Would you please describe it, and it will encompass some of the questions that were asked before about how you deal with problems. Tell us what, in your version, was the problem and how you proposed to resolve it and then how it ended up.
Certainly. And we did discuss it at the prior interview. So I came into office in 2006, and what happened to me as I walked in the door to City Hall was that the city of Methuen immediately started being served with subpoenas from the Department of Justice in Washington. The subpoenas were relative to 2 federal grants that the city had taken in under the prior mayoral administration. One called a Weed and Seed grant that was for approximately $175,000. It was a 5-year grant. The one before that was simply something I would call a COPS grant that the federal government gave to the community to try to increase police staffing. That was for about $30,000. So the subpoenas come into my office, and the chief of police and I discussed the best way to deal with these subpoenas, and we had a difference of opinion. It was my view, and it's still my view, that I didn't need subpoenas, that I did communicate to the DOJ that they didn't need to send subpoenas. They could come in and look at the records, take any records that they thought appropriate out of City Hall. The chief didn't agree. The long and the short of it is 2 things. One is that the Department of Justice back-charged the city of Methuen for the Weed and Seed grant, $175,000, and for a portion of the COPS grant, both which were to be administered by the chief of police and were administered by him. So we had a bill from the Department of Justice for just under $200,000. In the interim, because of that, the city council, quite honestly, was up in arms, as you might expect, having to pay back $200,000 of taxpayer money. It created a difficult situation for me. And so when the chief did not honestly want to take responsibility and would not cooperate in the ongoing effort to solve my problems at that point with the Department of Justice, I first suspended him for 3 days. That suspension was later upheld by the State Civil Service Commission. Secondarily, when the department, in my opinion, started to disintegrate, and I had no further choice, I terminated him. It was after the second grant came back as being deficiently managed. So to go back to an earlier point raised by the board, oftentimes in Massachusetts, poor management leaves you with either leave the gentleman in place and continue to have poor management, or do what you might do in the private sector, which was after 2 grants and $200,000, I just felt that while he was a good police officer, he was not a good administrator, and I removed him. And on a personal note, I can tell you that I grew up right around the corner from him. His parents, wonderful people and lifelong friends. It was a very difficult decision for me, but it was a decision that ultimately, in my view, was in the best interest of the community, and so I executed it. And that's as I don't know if you have any additional questions, but it
So
certainly...
how was it resolved after you terminated him?
So after I terminated the chief, he's a civil service chief. So he appealed his termination to the State Civil Service Commission. Now, that process is two-pronged. There's a local civil service hearing, and then there is a state civil service hearing. The local hearing upheld my termination. The more important one at the state did not uphold the termination, but found two things. They upheld me on the 3-day suspension, and they found wrongdoing so pervasive that they substituted a 1-year unpaid suspension onto the chief, but said that termination was too harsh. And so they restored him, but again, imposed a 1-year unpaid suspension on the chief at that time. To this minute, I'm not aware of any chief of police in Massachusetts that has gotten a 1-year suspension without pay. It's a point of disagreement that I have with the commission, but they upheld me on both counts, but modified the discipline. Thank you.
Sir?
Don't mean to push you too hard on this,
That's
Mr.
okay.
Nancy, but didn't the commission also find that Police Commissioner Solomon's termination was politically motivated? And didn't they make some rather strong statements?
I'm sorry, could you introduce yourself and your...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Jim
please.
Palermo, 68 Glendale.
Jim, thank you. The Civil Service Commission hearing officer, if you read the decision, I think that what you just said is a fair characterization. There was some criticism. Now, if you did read it, you know that the commissioner stated very forthrightly that there was some issue of who was telling the truth. And he said that he found certain folks credible. I can tell you that I disagree with the commissioner on that. He did say it was politically motivated, but when you look at the decision, I ask you to consider that what he said was one thing, but what he ruled was, to me, the important thing. And if it was politically motivated, why did he impose, again, fully uphold me on the 3-day suspension and impose a 1-year unpaid suspension on the chief? It certainly didn't jive with what he wrote, and I would respectfully disagree with the commissioner. But having said that, I can tell you that it was a difficult time for me personally. It was a difficult time for the city. I wish that it didn't have to happen. In looking back, I wish there was a way that two people that have known each other their whole lives were able to resolve it in a different way. But I'm not sure what community or what group of citizens would be happy about having a back charge from the Department of Justice for $200,000. Now, that report, which the commissioner did mention in the report, if you read that report, you might have a different view of ultimately why I took the action that I took. The Department of Justice report was extensive. It was pretty damaging to the city and to the chief personally. And ultimately, we could not overturn the finding, which we tried to, that said we owed the $200,000.
And the court upheld the commission's report.
The court upheld the commission's report, absolutely.
Right,
yes.
and, you know, my background is with the National Labor Relations Board, so I
Yes.
know that, you know, there's two sides to every story.
And there is.
But one thing, frankly, sort of bothered me a little bit about that report, and that was that you were characterized as having a profanity-laced, innuendo style of expression. And that is a particular concern to me because in a town like this, we have a lot of volunteers, and you know, I think we're a little bit more laid back than many communities.
Let me say this to you, that The reference there is to, it was a very highly charged time, and I can say this without going into too many details. The chief, before he was terminated, was out on suspension. And the chief did a lot of things to try to discredit both the city and the administration. And every day, for me, it was something else that the chief was doing. Now, I fully understand his viewpoint. He wanted to get his job back. And if that meant doing things that were a little unseemly, then so be it. Now, one of the things I told the interview board the first time around was that I've learned patience. There were a couple of conversations that occurred that I can tell you that I'm not proud of. It's not my management style, and it's not reflective of how I manage or deal with people. It really isn't. I know that may be easy for me to say sitting here, but it's honestly not. So, in 6 years, was I right about everything? No. Did I say a couple of things that I wish that I could pull back and say, you know what, I wish I didn't say that? Absolutely. So I don't sit here and tell you that an obscenity or two didn't come out during that highly charged time. Am I proud of it? Absolutely not. Was I happy that my kids saw that? Absolutely not. Is it something that I'm sorry for? Absolutely. But more importantly, it's not how I manage people. It's not how I interact with people. And I hope that you take me at my word on that.
Can I ask just one more fast question?
Yeah, absolutely.
You indicated that, actually I didn't hear your answer to Mr. Phelan's question about traveling from Methuen here.
Yes.
Did I understand that you'd be willing to live closer to Southampton?
Yes. At least during the week to start with, and then if...
Depending on his wife.
Yeah, I'd have to talk to the family, but certainly relocation would be a possibility, but I would like to stay up here during the course of the work week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Floyd? Did you have a question?
Partially answered. I'm Robert Floyd, 1950 East Street, Waltham, Southampton.
Thank you.
Hitchhiking off Mr. Phelan and Ms. Plum's question, I spent some quality time working with Jack Welch back when, and in a conversation, which I always will remember, he said he could only see anything in his company being number one or number two, at some point being number three in anything.
Yes.
And moving that forward, and again, hitchhiking off these questions, you have a life in Methuen, you have a commute ahead of you, you're a principal in another business, you have the town administrator position, and a lot of activities that go well above and beyond the 40-hour work week. So how are you going to handle it all? What's going to give?
Well, thankfully, I don't have to worry about the man's job anymore, but I think that one of the things that people would tell you about me is that I'm a high-energy individual, sometimes to my detriment, but as an administrator, as a manager, as a mayor, I throw myself into my work without reservation. So if I was hired as the administrator, you'd probably see more of me than you want to. But I will be here. That's the way I do the job. Mayor's job is a little bit different, I acknowledge, but I've spent long hours there, and I don't know how to do it any other way. I like to complete the job. I don't go home until the job is completed. And so I'm hard on myself, but I do work, and I enjoy working. So that's why I do it. So I will be here. Yeah, there would be the only issue that I see, I don't have any work issues per se, but I think that I'd have to settle the commute issue for sure.
Good answer.
Any other questions, Robert?
Thank you.
John, did you have a question?
I just want to follow up a little easier.
Sure.
After the first interview, we were talking about management styles, and you were saying you were very hands-off a little while ago, in which you related to us. But you also explain to the board that you're hands-on, you want to get to know people, you want to be there for them, but you don't micromanage people. And I think that's part of what you didn't explain.
It's an important concept, though, because no matter where you go, you're going to have department heads that are well-qualified, good folks that know their job in many cases better than you could ever hope to know it. And in Methuen, I did not micromanage my departments. Only if a problem bubbled back, we'd be there to try to help and try to deal with the problem. But certainly not in any way micromanaging. I don't believe in it. I think that if you have good people, what you're there to do is to try to help if help is needed. You try to do the best you can to produce a team effort that pushes the community forward. It's community first, and that's my management style. And it was in Methuen, and certainly would be here as well.
Eileen, do you have any questions at all?
No.
Eileen's our town clerk.
Nice to meet you.
Any other questions at this time? Vicki?
Hi, Vicki Morrow, Palmer Meadow Road. I'm actually the town accountant. So my question to you would be, you know, there are things in my office and probably in your auditor's office that people don't necessarily agree with on how the things are supposed to be processed or follow the law, how it's supposed to be done. And you come up with disagreements, excuse me, or arguments on that, and people want it done their way, but, you know, it has to be done a certain way. How would you kind of, you know, I guess, do you feel that that's important?
Yeah, it was.
You know, sorry.
Okay.
You know, that would be important to back your other department heads and what they're doing. It might not be what everyone agrees with, but it's the right thing to do.
I think that you bump into that particularly with auditors who are charged with only processing what's proper and to make sure that it's done the right way. So one of the things that we tried to do in the film was to have, I broke them down into what we call mini cabinet meetings. I did not like the larger cabinet meetings, so we tried to do mini ones. And I try to have the auditor, the foresoul there, each one of those. And if we could get discussion, then I think that we need a line of authority where, for example, as you said, you have a statute that needs to be followed or a way of doing things that needs to be followed. There's really not a lot of choice there. So I think that's where an administrator can be helpful in taking some of that load off the department and putting it onto the administrator to make sure that it gets done. I don't think that you have to be unseemly about it, but certainly we all have to follow the law. And that's one of the things I think the strengths that the administrator can bring is to resolve those types of intramurals and get us all on the same page as far as those things go.
Donna, do you have any questions? Okay. Are there any other questions at this time? Liz?
Nope.
Okay.
I can ask a question, if that's okay?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm Barbara Golden, I'm the director of the library.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm sure you have a library in the facility?
Yes.
I was just wondering what you saw as the value of the library in the community?
In Methuen, we not only have a library, but while I was a city councilor, the city, it's a sort of a hybrid library because there's a private board of trustees, but the city essentially funds the operation. So we, and I voted to bond a total rehab of the library. And the librarian is a wonderful person, Krista McLeod in the film. And what I said on a political basis was that while I was the mayor, we would never fall below the threshold needed to maintain accreditation. And I made that promise because I love the library in the film, but I think libraries are a tremendous value added for the community. So despite the difficult times financially in 08 and 09, we never went below the accreditation amount. And I did that as a recommendation. The city council agreed, but I did it because I think libraries are a tremendous value to the community. and I tend to like to read. So the library has my heart, let me just put it that way. It is for them, and I think it's a tremendously good asset for each community.
All right, any other questions? Bill, do you have any other questions? for
No,
us?
I think you've been good enough to answer them all. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you coming out and visiting.
I appreciate it too. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Be safe, Brad.
Nice meeting you.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Nice to
Thank
meet
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back is just not to stand. So what'd you guys think?
You want to discuss each one as we go?
That's a bad joke, I shouldn't do that, but I'm just like, I'd open the floor for any comments. How's that? Is that okay, Michael?
That's fine, but
Any public comments at this time, following this part of the select board meeting?
I'd like to wait till we see everyone and then have people comment on.
Oh, that's fine, good, good. So we're waiting for Craig Kelman. I don't know if he's in the hallway or...
Cleveland.
Cleveland?
Yes.
Is that how you pronounce his name? I'm
Yes.
sorry. He's coming from further away.
Should we review the agenda at all?
We just say this in the hallway or something. Susan's been here.
Hey, Reg.
Some water here. Oh, Jackie?
no, yeah. You didn't send it with Jackie to go to.
Hey, Mike, did you,
Wait a minute.
I'm sorry. No, it's just, we got the contract for the roof, and,
Yeah, I didn't see that until tonight.
yeah, we'll talk about it, but I think it needs to go to the council to be looked at. We just have to figure out the timelines. Yes, ma'am?
We can be off there now.
Right. And then, we met Jackie Sears. Yes. And then Liz Bolton as our newest member on the which comes back on Tuesday. Okay? We have some simple questions. And then, we happen to open it up to the floor. Sure. These two guys here, the first candidates, just to let you know, okay?
Despite their good looks and quiet demeanor, they turned up the fry pan.
Put together something that I've had before, and you gentlemen haven't seen it, I think, Mr. Floyd did, and so did, Selectman Sears. I don't have it right here, this is just a two-page I put together.
So if I call you Craig, is that okay?
Craig, yeah, and it's Clement, like Roger, no one else.
Okay. Someone told me it was Kleeman for some reason. Clement.
Oh, there you go, I see it correctly.
Well, welcome, I appreciate you coming up.
Thanks for having me.
Are we back on air? All right, thank you. You've already gone through the first set of interviews with the subcommittee.
Sure.
Mike and I haven't had a chance to meet you, so just some simple questions. And I'm trying to remember the questions I asked the first candidate. One of them is, why Southampton? Why Southampton?
I think I explained to the committee, I mean, I've been kind of following Southampton in the newspapers. I knew that for a variety of things you were using iPads to put all your paperwork on, and that even though you had an interim town administrator, at some point you thought you were looking for a permanent town administrator, so I thought I'd keep that on my radar. I think it's an interesting community. I think your origins are an ag community, basically, now becoming a bedroom community, and I think, the future's uncertain, but if a casino is sited in Springfield, I think I come from a background of community and economic development, and I think that's something good to have an administrator, at least to attend meetings in terms of what might come out of those if a casino is sited there and how it would impact, since you do have people moving to town from the last committee meeting, they told me that you do have people moving and building in town, so there might be an influx of housing that might impact your schools or, even your services you offer. And even though I was over in the Berkshires, when I was in Beckett, I did come over and explore the Pioneer Valley, and, I've gone to concerts at the Iron Horse and been to Greenfield and gone to the Green River Festival and been to Springfield for a few events. So it's the kind of place that I think has the right mix for me, urban and rural, so.
So are you living in Portsmouth, New Hampshire at this time?
Yes, presently, yeah.
Okay. All right. And but you're working for the town of Beckett?
Oh, no, I've left their employ at the end of the year.
Oh, okay, okay. Where are you working now, if you mind?
I'm unemployed. I'm doing some temp work here and there.
Okay, all right. And it looks like you've had some experience in several different communities, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Massachusetts. And I was just wondering, what was one of the more difficult decisions or events that you had to go through as an administrator?
Well, I think it goes back to Beckett. I mean, I was thinking about this. You could say it was a success as well as a failure in some ways, but, we had a long-time, part-time police chief that was over the mandatory age in Massachusetts. He was at 65 and he was 70, and when I got there, they were trying to remove him based on their conversations with the retirement board out of Boston and stuff like that, and finally the gentleman decided to leave the town's employ. After he retired, he ran and is now on the select board. It's a different story, but at that point, there was an opportunity whether the town wanted to go to a full-time police chief, and after much discussion, the select board decided by a majority to do that. And then after we started that process, it became, we spent about 2 months on designing a job description for the new police chief, and, I called a whole bunch from around different communities, and a lot of people in a police chief, they want somebody with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice or public administration. We had a couple candidates internally who wanted to apply. One did have a bachelor's and one didn't, and after much discussion, we relaxed the job description so he could apply, and he did apply, and then we appointed a police chief search committee, and I posted something in the Mass Municipal, and we got about 60 resumes across the country by internet mailed to us. But one of the problems we did encounter is every time we had either a select board meeting or right at the town meeting, there was somebody who would walk in on the process in terms of the 11th hour, and they would question why we were going to a full-time police chief. There'd been a rash of burglaries in town, and it was just, for the community its size, it swells to about 8,000 people in the summer with second homeowners and camps, that it was an appropriate thing to do. That, the select board, even though they were there at these meetings, I'd look at them and they'd say, well, they left it to me to explain this over and over again to some people that weren't very enthusiastic about going to a full-time police chief. And so I kind of carried that water through select board meetings right up to town meeting to explain it, because as the administrator, I had to design a budget for potentially a candidate who might not come from in-house, so that they had enough salary to attract a viable candidate, as well as a benefit package for somebody potentially who might bring a family with them. We went through the search committee, but by the bylaws of Beckett, ultimately, it's the appointment of the town administrator to do that. And I sat through the whole process when they got down to their final round, sat in as observer unless there was some question about benefits or something like that, watched the candidates, because ultimately I thought once they brought a list forward to me, I would interview those candidates again and then bring them forward. I mean, and it's an appointment by the town administrator with the approval of the selectmen. And as I said, the police chief was on that new board and stuff like that, and one internal candidate he did like, one internal candidate he wasn't as enthusiastic about. And so, I think I've worked in local government and state government for 30 years. There's always that political calculus you have to do in terms of figuring who's going to be a viable candidate. And when they gave some names forward, I thought that, there wasn't a list that I thought might get approval, so I called it to the 5 finalists. One man had to resign because he had injured himself on the job on Long Island, so he had to have surgery and couldn't be an active police officer for a number of months. And I interviewed all 5, did my best to vet them, to talk to them about things, was very frank and honest with them. After hours, had meetings when I could accommodate them. It's only a 1-year appointment in Beckett, so, for some people to leave their job where they might be an officer in another police department to become a police chief, which is a goal for a lot of these men, but, and then not get reappointed and have uprooted their families was a difficult situation. And I finally decided to go with the internal candidate who had a bachelor's degree, and at the end of the year, end of the fiscal year, the selectmen did appoint him as the full-time chief.
And what did you find difficult with that? It sounds like it would be a normal process with...
It was very stressful because, as I say, people would always kind of come and confront the selectmen. I mean, there was always a vocal group that wasn't happy that we just didn't appoint.
Right, there was always the cave people, citizens against virtually everything, and that's in any community. I mean, that's just part of being part of municipal government, right?
Well, I just think it was very stressful. I mean, people were very, vociferous about, what they thought was, why are we doing this process and stuff like that? And to be fair, we did go forward, and, I think because I was so closely involved in it, it became a very personal thing to me because having to address all of these comments that would come up and, regurgitate over and over again what was the process from months ago, so.
That can be frustrating.
Yes.
That's right. What do you think one of the biggest failings you've had as an administrator?
I think, sometimes, depending on the community, I come from community development, administering grants and stuff like that. So, Beckett had a Green Communities grant, as well as when I was there, they were able to secure a large community development block grant from the state. And I have a wealth of experience there. But in terms of sometimes forgetting about the community, you have to be actively involved. I mean, that being said, I always have an open door policy. I mean, day one, when I go to a community, anybody can walk through that door, and they do, and tell me about their concerns. There was a lady in Vermont who was concerned about trees, wanted to get some tree grants. My predecessor didn't want to apply for them. I did, and we had a very successful program planting trees in the community. So if you don't have a town square or a downtown, or, in Vermont I had a village, so it was very easy for people to stop me on the street and talk to me. But if you're spread out all over the place, and it's only if someone gets to the town hall, sometimes you don't see the inner workings of the community. And, I think that's something where you have to be more visible in the community. You have to go to the Hammond Bean Summers, or you have to go to other things that are out there, just to kind of catch those people who can't make it into town hall or don't want to be seen talking to the administrator in the town hall.
Do you have any specific, do you recall any specific events that you felt that you had failed in some fashion, and any details regarding that, or?
No, I just say that, in Mass, there's the Mass Municipal Association, and they put on what they call a boot camp for managers. And, I think even some of the other candidates that you're interviewing attended the last one I went to, and it's not just for, interns who want to be a manager someday, or for brand new minted town administrators. You'll find people there who have been there for 20 years, in a sense of community, and it's just something that I think is the real essence of being an administrator, that you're out there and being viable. I mean, some of it's anecdotal, one lady would go get her coffee and she'd be picking up trash, and one day she picked up a beer can, and before she got to the other side, someone saw her with that, and before she threw it away, but, you have to be proactive in terms of being out there, and more than just being in town hall. I mean, sometimes you get chained to your desk. I mean, that's regrettably what happens, because you're dealing on a big project, or you've got to be there because of something that's happening in town hall, or you're administering grants or dealing with emails, and you can't get out and about like you should sometimes.
Okay, very good. Mike, do you have any questions?
Yeah, excuse me, because when I read your resume, it appeared you were still the administrator in Beckett, so I kind of got to back up a little. Who's the current administrator up there?
Ed Gibson got the job from West Springfield.
Okay. The former mayor?
Yes.
Okay. And when you left Beckett, I think you said it was at the end of last year?
Right, December 31st.
Why were your contract renewed, or was it voluntary, or?
I filled the previous administrator that they had before I got there. He only lasted a year. It's a three-year term. And last June, the select board decided that they wanted to give me just 6 months to deal with it. There was some issues they felt from people in town hall that I wasn't, town hall employees, that I wasn't being as proactive as I could be. During that tenure, you know, only thing in my defense I could say about that is that, you know, on my watch, I felt like everything was falling apart that hadn't been dealt with over the course of many years. There was a long time in administrator. You know, one of the big issues was the old server we had. We had a server that was 9 years old, and it was constantly falling apart and breaking down, shutting off. And eventually I talked to the finance committee, which I work with pretty closely, to allocate a certain amount of money I had gotten from one of the IT providers that worked with us, what it would cost to get a new server, got that transferred out of you know, the reserve they have out of free cash to do that, and then I procured the services of an IT provider to come in and change out the old server and the data and migrate it to the new server. What should have been a 3-day job turned out to be 2 months because of, you know, the length of time between the iterations of server software and stuff like that. And, you know, I bore the heat of that. I mean, we talk about successes and failures. I mean, that was, you know, constantly I tried to keep the town staff apprised of what was happening, but, you know, we live in a world of instant gratification. You know, town halls aren't the simplistic governments they're not anymore. I mean, you have the database from RMV, as well as, you know, your tax records and everything, and when people can't access their files or their something on their computer, it becomes a problem, you know, and I bore the brunt of that because it was a prolonged process.
So were you only in Beckett 6 months, or am I?
No, 21 months.
21
I came on March of 2011 and went to the end of the year.
Went to the end of 2012.
Yes.
Which brings me to my next question. Looking at your resume, the resume covers the period of 1998 to the present.
Sure.
You said 30 years in government, so I'm assuming there's some experience back beyond 98 that...
Well, they always talk about just doing a one-page resume. You know, I have a wealth of it. I mean, it probably has 3 pages there, but of it, what I call my community and economic development experience that I didn't share with you, you know.
But when I look at that and follow the resume from 1998 forward to the present, it looks like the longest you stayed in the position is about 3 years.
Well, I could explain each one of those tenures if you want, you know.
Well, I think just a summary as to why such a turnover of positions, you know, some of these positions lasted a year, some 2, the longest is 3 years. Why so many positions since 98?
Well, I was able to get my start in municipal government in 1998. The village of Lyndonville and the town of Lyndon in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont hired me. You know, you have to have certain prerequisites. You know, I have dealt and supervised people, some personnel administration, you know, as well as budgeting and stuff like that. And so finally, when I think I had enough of that, I applied for this job and was successful in getting that. I worked with them for 3 years, but I'm divorced and I had a son back in New Hampshire, and I felt I wanted to get closer to him. I applied for the town of Epping job and achieved that goal. Regrettably, you know, I think I went off because I was attracted by a higher paying job across the border in Massachusetts, in Merrimack, Mass. It's like anything, select boards do change and the composition changes, and at the next town meeting, a new board, a new majority got in there, and I felt that some of the people were trying to, had their own agenda, and were trying to replace systematically some of the department heads. Not that I was a part of it, but they did have people leave and resign, and after doing that for about 13 months, as you say, I didn't want to be a part of that effort, and I left. You're only as good, I think, in life as your last accomplishments, and after that, I spent about 18 months using my savings to try and find a job in New England. Wasn't successful, and then had to go out and try to find some other employment to make it. But ultimately, my goal was to get back into municipal management. I was afforded the opportunity through various acting and interim capacities in New Hampshire. Wasn't successful in becoming a permanent manager in any of those communities, and decided to relocate to Vermont, but did apply for a job in Vermont that was looking for an administrator. I was successful when I got there, being Johnny on the spot, to get that job. Did that for 27 months, I think, and decided that I wanted to come to the Berkshires. I have a boyhood connection to the Berkshires, and thought it'd be a great opportunity. I'm from New Jersey originally, and I thought it'd be a great opportunity also to be closer to my family that still lives there. But it didn't work out after 21 months.
You still have family in Beckett?
No, in New Jersey.
In New Jersey,
Yeah.
closer to New Jersey. Well, and you mentioned your son is one of the your family is one of your decision makers for moving or changing jobs to come back down from the Northeast Kingdom, which is about as far up as you can go. Where's that situation now? Are you tied to New Hampshire, or are you tied to?
No, my son is a college student, lives with his mom. He's lived with her for years, so he's not part of the equation. I'm a single person that can relocate pretty quickly and easily.
Now, you talked about dealing with a fire chief position, a police chief position in Beckett. We're going to be dealing with a fire chief's position here. In fact, it's on the agenda tonight to appoint a committee, a reviewing committee or interview committee. How would you evaluate a fire chief in a town such as ours?
Well, I have seen the article. I guess you had 28 candidates. You have an internal candidate. You're not going to use the members of the town administrative search committee. You're going to have a brand new committee. I don't know what your bylaws state in terms of the involvement of the town administrator. I think, you probably, if it's really at some point a selectman's decision with the finalists brought forward by this committee you're going to establish, I'm sure whatever direction that the selectmen give me in terms of helping them to expand or be part of the interview process or some kind of vetting for those candidates, that's what I would do. I don't know if it's a hire by the town administrator and with approval by the selectmen. It's probably not. It's a position that's approved by the board.
Which brings me to the next question. The town administrator position in this town is basically no authority, no power. It's, under our direction, supervision. I don't know how it was in Beckett, and I certainly don't know how it is up in Vermont for those positions. But how do you feel about a position where I refer to it as herding cats?
Yeah, that's a tough one, herding cats. But, I think an oxymoron is a strong town administrator. I've never encountered that until I got to Beckett. Usually, there's 3 different levels of municipal management. You have a manager that can do hiring and firing. You have an administrator that basically doesn't do any hiring and firing in most communities, but acts at the, the behest of a select board. And then you usually have some towns that have an administrative assistant, an executive secretary, or whatever else is out there in terms of that terminology, a coordinator in some places. So it's always been my experience in other communities that really, I work with the board. I mean, hopefully, even like in a manager situation, it's a partnership. We become a team that works together, but the administrator has to defer to the board and carry out their wishes. Even if we have a discussion about a policy and the board decides some other way that I personally don't agree with, I will, carry out the implementation of that policy. I will not do anything that's unethical or illegal, but I will do everything to the best of my ability to implement a policy that is developed by the select board.
Thank you.
Hello again.
How you doing?
Good. What experience do you have with personnel and labor relations?
I've taken trainings. Personnel administration, especially union negotiations, is something you have to learn on the job. I'm a firm believer in progressive discipline. Even when you give somebody a verbal warning, it should be written down and put in their file that they were given a verbal warning on this date for whatever offense they might have committed. I think you spend a lot of time bringing people on board and training your workers, and I think you want to salvage them as much as possible, but sometimes regrettably you do have to terminate after a period of time, and they have to be fired for cause. That said, I've also worked in union negotiations in the town of Epping. We only had one union. It was the police had a union, and I would work with the police chief as well as the town council in sitting down in a team approach to develop what our position would be and meet with the police chief steward, as well, or the union steward, as well as they were represented by the Teamsters, someone from the Teamsters, and we negotiated a pay increase and some other issues we didn't do. Town of Merrimack had 5 unions, with 3 of the contracts coming due during my tenure. The select board decided to have an open discussion with the unions, with the town council president as well as myself, in terms of looking at that. We looked at some of the healthcare issues. You know, there's always the other side of the coin. There's a lot of what I used to call a non-affiliated group that aren't in the union, and they are usually sometimes neglected. So I did a little bit of a across-the-board analysis of the various unions and what they brought forward, you know, and gave that, and we moved forward on that. And in one community I went to, Seabrook, New Hampshire, that's where they have a nuclear power plant. So this community has a lot of money, and it's almost full employment for the town. But it's very unionized, and I really cut my teeth on a lot of that, what you need to do. I looked at, one of the department heads kind of led me astray and wanted to pick up a standalone employee, and he wanted to get special consideration for hours and stuff like that. And it took me, I was only there for 2 months in an acting capacity, but it took me long and hard to examine that situation. And I also met with the union stewards in the town, that if I had moved forward, I would have been part of an unfair labor practice. So I put together something and told them that I could not go forward to the department head, as well as alerted to the union steward what happened, and that raised a little bit of a rumpus, but, you know, not so much that I was giving a fair decision, but because the department head was trying to do an end around the union. And during my tenure there, you know, we had a highway guy who came back, and, you know, he tested positive for drugs, and their procedure was that he was suspended immediately, put on basically an administrative leave with no pay, and he had to complete a course that probably would take about 5 weeks to show that he had recovered, was drug-free, and then maybe the town would take him back at some point. That didn't happen in my tenure, but, you know, so I had a lot of those various decisions, as well as just the straight people not getting along in town hall and sitting down and talking to them and asking them to act as grown-ups in some ways. So that's my experience.
Good, thank you. I have one more.
Go ahead.
How would you go about assessing the strengths and weaknesses of organizations, identifying opportunities to improve them?
Well, when I go into an organization, usually I try to look first and foremost in terms of personnel. You know, I want to see what people are potentially out there that maybe could lend assistance to me in terms of doing something, in terms of special projects, or, you know, I mean, in Vermont I had a zoning administrator that wanted to write grants. We looked long and hard, and finally we had an issue that we could get some money from the state for, and he wrote the grant. I helped him to edit it, and then when he was successful, I oversaw his administration of the grant. So I'm always looking for people like that, as well as disgruntled people in an organization. You have to gauge whether they're people that can be salvaged for whatever reason, or they're a cancer in the organization, and maybe they have to be excised at some point, you know. I think you have to sit back and look at the big picture. I mean, that's something that the town administrator has the opportunity to do that, because they work with all the different departments. I think as I mentioned to you last time, you know, when you don't put the budget together, you're always asking a lot of questions about, well, what's that $35,000 for? But once you get past that first iteration and you work to put a budget together, then you can see what the needs are of a community, of a department, and how they prioritize. I mean, my experience starting out in local government was for the city of Manchester, New Hampshire. It was 90,000 people when I started, and now it's over 100,000. And I worked for their capital improvement division, as well as we administered all the grants that came through, because they were an entitlement community, as well as any state grants. And we put together a community improvement program plan for about 7 years, and how things would queue up. And sometimes things did slip, or a more urgent priority would come along and they would move up and something would move down. So I have that experience to see, you know, what possibly can be inefficiencies. You know, I know that in reading a recent article that because your stabilization fund has been pretty much depleted, there are still some needs that you hope to address at a special town meeting in the fall, if it's doable, you know. And it's tough. Before I got to Beckett, they talked about, having a low stabilization, and gradually over time, they built it back up. So I think that's the way you look at in terms of what the efficiencies can be in government, in terms of what are the needs, how people can work smarter, be more productive, and go about doing that. And I think also, an aside to that is developing performance evaluations for people. I've developed those where it was based on their actual job description. So, and if something was in their job description that's not viable anymore, you kick it out and you get a more realistic job description. And this way, everybody's talking about a comparison of apples to apples, and and go forward from there.
Thank you. Hi. Can you tell us about a specific time when you had to support a decision that maybe you didn't agree with? And how did you handle that?
I can't think of one in all my tenure. I mean, usually I prep the select board with a variety of options. I guess not so much one I didn't agree with. We were looking at healthcare insurance in Vermont, and when you work, we got ours from the local Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and if you don't give them notice that you're going to leave their plan within 60 days, you're locked into it or you pay a penalty. And there was some move afoot that they wanted me to examine healthcare insurance, and what I came up with by going to various trainings was that maybe we should consider a high deductible plan for our employees. And I tried to present that to the select board maybe 2 or 3 weeks before we started the whole budget process. So it got kind of lost in that whole rush to start the budget, and my first year there, it didn't get implemented because they just didn't grasp all the particulars of that, The next year, I definitely went back to the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, got the person who dealt with our area for health insurance, had them come in sometime in the end of September, and just developed that whole issue. We brought them back again to talk to all the workers about what the impact would be, and then the select board at some point decided to move forward with that. So it wasn't so much I had to implement a decision that I didn't agree with. It just took longer to bring everybody to the table to get to that point.
Okay. And what would your coworkers, past coworkers or current coworkers, say about your work ethic and your style of communication?
I think, I'm a pretty open person. I mean, I have an open door policy for citizens as well as for town employees to come in, That being said, I think if I see something or if somebody tells me something's happened, I always like to bring a person into my office, close the doors, and we talk about it in private, about an issue that might be out there. So it has no ramifications, and it doesn't even start that, progressive discipline approach. I'm not a person to get in the morning and hang around the water cooler and socialize. I'm a very friendly person, but if you sit in this job long enough, you've got a very busy day. I try to prioritize what I need to do for that day, for the week, and go forward from that. But I'm an approachable person. When you work in small towns, you have to be approachable. You can't become detached or sit in your office and close the door. I've worked in small communities in Vermont where the highway crew couldn't get there in time, and I've gone out and shoveled the walk. I've raised the flag and lowered it, all that stuff. So I think you really have to realize you're part of a team there. If there's anything, and just say, well, it's beneath the town administrator. I've always tried to organize a little Christmas holiday celebration, do a Yankee swap or something like that, so we can bring together a variety of disparate departments, the police, maybe some fire people, as well as town hall people, and get together and have some camaraderie there and develop that esprit de corps. So I work hard to try to get people to function. I can't get everybody to agree with everybody, but to just try to create an atmosphere where people can be civil to each other and respect their coworkers.
Thank you.
Greg, do you have any questions for us?
Well, I guess, out of that article I saw, we had about 4 things that you're going to consider at special town meeting, plus there's also this issue of doing a feasibility study for a potential public safety complex. What would be the role of the town administrator in something like that project?
In the past, that town administrator has assumed a de facto leadership role in that, as our liaison to that committee. Right now, we all serve as liaison to, I don't know, 5 or 10 committees apiece, somewhere in that number. And it's impossible to make all those meetings. I know I'm a failure at it. So we rely, when we had an administrator in the past, they have been the one to go to those meetings and bring back the information, and also to help guide those volunteer committees down the path that they're trying to get to.
How involved was Diana when we were redoing this?
She used to go to some of the meetings. She certainly went to finance committee meetings, CPA. I mean, she went to the major committees.
But I mean, when we were redoing this building, how involved was she going to the building committee meetings and stuff like that?
Very involved.
I think she was probably our primary liaison. I mean, I think we all, I'm trying to remember who was on that committee, but
Swanson,
I don't remember which one of us was.
Dougie.
I was Doug.
Dougie. A former selectman was like we had one person on that board, Doug Blanchard, he's no longer a selectman.
So it was her and him that went.
Just sort of keeping abreast, making sure anything exploded, we kind of knew something was ticking, so we're sort of prepared for it. Like we have a project coming up now with the Norris School roof, and we're always sort of looking at the bills and saying, okay, what percentage is it going to go up, and we just like to know beforehand. So we need someone to communicate directly with either Jurgensen, who's the superintendent for the regional school, who's sort of involved in that, or at least with Mr. Collins, who's the principal. So we're sort of getting a sense of if there's going to be cost overruns or something like that. So that would be an important role for the town administrator.
Well, I would say to you that, in every capacity I've been in as administrator, I always put together a town administrator's report before a meeting. And it usually talks about ongoing issues that have happened, any emerging issues. I mean, I used to send that by email when I had a town that everybody had email. Or I used to just draft it up and put it in a little cubby hole. I mean, I'm sure it's something that can always be scanned or imported somehow into your iPads that you're aware of that. My experience back working for the city of Manchester, I did pass out this accomplishment sheets, and for some reason, fire stations have been part of the mix of what I've done. Manchester, we had an old obsolete fire station that was from the 1890s that they used to have horses pull through the...
We got you beat.
Okay. But people wanted to save it, and the thing was, if you know anything about fire stations, they're very new. You need a decontamination place for people after they go out and fight all kinds of materials. Plus, they've got a place to wash their gear because you don't want it taking home, especially if you've got kids or something like that. Plus the other stuff, exhaust and stuff like that. I mean, and I used to serve as the designee on an ad hoc special building committee in Manchester for that. We did 3 school additions, so I tracked that all through. You can see from my resume as well as this sheet that I worked on a fire station in Vermont that they started to build from scratch after they got bond approval from the citizens. And then, of course, when I got the Beckett, I hit the ground running. They had some ARA stimulus monies to retrofit their ambulance garage and their fire station. So somehow this has been something that's been part of my past work experience.
It's kind of hard to retrofit a 100-year-old schoolhouse, which is what our fire station is.
Very good. If it's okay with you, Greg, I'd like to open it up to the audience so they could ask some questions.
Sure.
And I'll just go down the same lines, make it easier. Whoever asks first, go just make it easier. So there's a gentleman in a red shirt there. If you could just introduce yourself to him so he knows who you are if you have a question.
I'd like to defer to my good colleague and neighbor, Jim. Mr. Clement, I'd like to give you the opportunity to respond to something that, when I was vetting your resume, after you left the job in Beckett, you were quoted in the paper saying, "Personnel issues have been my biggest failing in that I expect people to do their jobs, but this is impossible when you have a mature workforce that has long been entrenched." Could you explain what you meant by that?
Well, I've worked in a lot of communities, worked for a lot of different people. I've found that personnel administration is something that you learn on the job. You can go to a training, but you really have to deal with it. And in Beckett, it's like anything. I mean, I only learned this lesson the past 2 jobs I was in, that people, even though I bring a professional management experience, objective professional management experience, you might be friends with somebody at town hall for the past 25 years, and if you're a selectman and they encounter you at the town dump and they want to talk to you, they can chew your ear off for a while, and I think, as I mentioned to the select board, that, one of the biggest things I had to deal with was the replacement of the server. And people in town were not very, people in town hall, the employees, were not very accommodating for something that became kind of a disaster. I changed out a server back in Vermont, worked with the IT vendor, and he came in and did a long day one day, worked from 9 to 9, but accomplished it, and then could salvage, repair it remotely, or with me working on a console up there. So, in many ways, that was my undoing, as well as there are some things when you talk about efficiencies, that, because there was this tenure, they had a long time town administrator for 14 years, a person from town who retired. They hired a lawyer from Great Barrington who had some experience with planning. He lasted all of 1 year. No one could give me a straight answer why he was let go, even though he had a 3-year term. And the biggest thing was he cursed at the copy machine, and created a hostile work environment. But, there's always more to that story, and I think I encountered that when I tried to reach out and change some of the hours of some of the workers, because they were, they would come in early, and then their boss would stay later, and nobody really sat down and dealt with the manager, in terms of helping them to become a better manager, because there was a generational thing, and I'm not, I'm 57 years old, and you're probably, 39? And, and some things need to be done, but, in this day and age, when you have some very finite resources, and everybody's asked to work smarter with less resources, people have to be willing to work outside the box. And if all you have is your box, the skill you've done for a period of time, and you don't want to go beyond that, that creates some difficulties, So, and that's what I encountered, and that's about the best way I could put it in what I said,
Robert?
Hi, welcome to Southampton.
Thank you.
I'm Robert Floyd, 15 East Street. I have a very easy question. I used to teach the art of the interview to New York College of Business and University, and this is one of our favorite easy top 5 questions. What quality, one-word qualities, would your friends, associates say when you left the room about you? So 5 one-word qualities.
I gotta give you 5 one-word qualities.
Easy one, Robert?
In Spanish.
Intelligent, quick study, hard worker, organized, detail-oriented.
Excellent, thank you.
I forget who's next. Oh, you, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Kleeman, in your resume, there's some gaps, which I'm sure were probably intentional, I don't know. But I'd like you to just comment on them. There's a gap between 2005, 2008, another gap, 2001, 2005, and then there's nothing before 2001. And I realize you're young, so that...
Yeah, I don't know if you have the whole resume, because this is what I call my municipal resume.
Oh.
And 1998 to 2001, I worked for the town of Linden, which should be on there, I think, on the second page.
That's in here.
Okay, and then from 2001 to 2004, I worked for the town of Epping in New Hampshire. And then from 2004 to 2005, I worked for the Merrimack, Massachusetts town, the town of Merrimack in Massachusetts.
That's in here.
That's it. So I got done in 2005, as I said, decided not to go forward with that job, and spent about a year and a half looking for work all over New England. So that brings you to about June of 2006. At that point, I ran out of my savings, and I took whatever job I could get. My first job was as a paperboy. I was very good at it, and so I always bring that work ethic and my luck and pluck to it. Found some jobs. I really don't want to say what I did, but they were legal. but I just went out and started to just, rebuild and do stuff and get on that, with the ultimate goal of getting back into municipal management. I did, because I was living in New Hampshire, knew the people who, like Mass Municipal, run the New Hampshire organization. They gave me some opportunities to apply for some acting gigs, which I did do. I worked for the town of Seabrook from February to May in 2007. When that ended, I went back to New Jersey, where I'm from, and worked with my brother on some ideas that he had. Didn't happen, didn't come to fruition. Returned to New England the end of that summer and did some temp work. I was part of those teams that changed out all the Brooks into righties for a period of time until that project wound down. And at the same time it wound down, I started this interim town administrator stuff that I did in 2 communities in New Hampshire. When I didn't get the permanent position in late fall in Plastown, New Hampshire, I decided to relocate back to Vermont, where I had friends, but applied for jobs up there. And when I got to Vermont, I was called in for an interview and started my career again, full-time, in 2009 in the town of East Montpelier, until one weekend I was done, and the next weekend I went down and started my career in Beckett until the end of this year. So, thank you.
John, did you have a question? You next? Who's next?
I don't have any additional questions. I think you answered them during the first interview, fine.
Any other questions, Vicki? Eileen? Eileen's the town clerk, and Vicki is the town accountant, and Donna is the tax collector for the town.
No, she's treasurer.
Treasurer. Treasurer, tax collector. Thank you. No other questions? Wait, do you have any other questions for us?
I think that's about it. All I have.
Well, thank you for coming by. I
Okay.
appreciate it. Thanks for your
Thank you.
time. Please drive safely.
If you're going all the way back up to Portsmouth.
No, I got a room. I'm going to stay tonight. I'm not going tomorrow. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you all. Good luck.
Is everybody still awake?
Yeah.
We have about 15 minutes before the next one is scheduled, so. Figure we just keep moving right along, and it's been a long day already. Well, welcome.
Regular agenda.
What's that?
We have a regular agenda.
I know, we have to get to that towards the end. So, we're just gonna ask some questions and let you ask some questions, and then, if you don't mind, there is an eager audience behind you.
Okay.
With some questions. We are being taped. Are we going out live as well? Yes. So we're live and we're being taped for
All
posterity.
the homes in town, they're all watching us.
No pressure. So anyways, I've been asking some of the same questions over and over again just to get things rolling. And the first question is, why Southampton?
Well, I think it's a great job and a great opportunity, and at this point in my life, it would work very well for me with my home and my family. I guess that the other side of that question is, why am I looking to move? And it's really mostly for personal reasons. I'm in Athol, and there is a residence requirement, and it's quite a ways away from my home in Ludlow. So I'm maintaining 2 residences, which is difficult, and my family really has more ties to this area. My wife works in Holyoke, my daughter goes to school in Chicopee, so I'm looking to be in the valley, and this is a great town. I mean, it's a beautiful town. You're close to pretty much everything. I mean, you have a rural character, but you're really an easy drive from Springfield, from Holyoke, from Northampton. I think it's a great place to be.
Can I stop you for 1 second?
Yes.
That microphone doesn't amplify. Are you guys able to
Okay.
hear? No, I assume so.
I'm always told that I do not speak loud enough in meetings.
Just relax. I mean, it's just,
I could see people starting to lean forward.
I'm sorry, I will try and project a little
Will the
more.
seniors move forward, please?
There was a heck of a loaded question.
Well, some people started to move, I just, Eileen didn't budge.
Hey, leave her out of it.
Around, you only need one.
One of my current selectmen has some hearing problems, so I always have to remember to project a little more so he can hear. So I will do my best.
I was on a board with two, that one was deaf as a doornail on one side, the other one had his hearing aids in, but didn't turn them on. He sat on the other end, so it was always quite amusing when he would sort of wake up, perk up. But anyway, so it sounds like you're in Athol, but you'd like to come back this way because of...
I would like to be here for personal reasons more than I love the people there. They're really nice, good people. One of my selectmen came in this morning and said, "I'd like to wish you luck, but I really can't do it. I had a way to go." So there's something to that, but I need to be near my family.
Now, it looks like you were working in Uxbridge. That's still kind of a...
That was a hike. There was no residency requirement, and the board changed, and they wanted to go in a different direction.
That does happen from time to time. What was one of the more difficult things that you had to do as an administrator in any of your positions that you sat?
I think when you have personnel issues that are intractable, that you can't resolve, and I think the hardest one, and I don't want to get into specifics obviously, but it had to do with a police officer who was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and I had to have this person retire, and it was gut-wrenching for me, and it was gut-wrenching for the officer. So I think that's probably the hardest thing I ever did. And right now, I'm working on a budget that we had a tremendous shortfall this year in Athol. We experienced a 17% increase in our retirement assessment, a 17% increase in our regional school assessment, and the local school was about 10% in insurance, so I had a huge budget hole.
How much is your budget each year?
It's about $19 million.
So ours is about $13.5–14 million.
Yeah. Well, Athol is not a wealthy community. So I had a big hole to fill, and I've managed to save virtually all the positions. We'll be taking some furloughs, myself included, but I still have two positions, a part-time and a full-time position that are slated to be eliminated. And that's a hard thing to do.
It is. And what about failures? What would you say one of your biggest failures as administrator?
Well, the other side of that issue with the police officer, I worked with her, I'm sorry, shouldn't have said her, that it was a female, but I worked with the officer for over a year with the online academy and trying to save the situation, but it spiraled downhill. So that I consider a personal failure, that I couldn't save her as an officer, because that was her chosen profession.
And before Uxbridge, you were in South Hadley?
Very briefly.
And then Ludlow itself?
Ludlow, I was there for a long time. And honestly, I wish I had not left Ludlow. It was a great job, and I left there because I was offered more money. And I don't think I'll ever do that again.
Lessons we learn. That's how we become wise, I guess.
Yeah.
Very good. Michael, do you have any questions?
Hi. I do have a couple. Now, you've only been in Athol since September.
Yes.
And you must have known about the residency requirement before you went there.
I knew about the residency requirement, but I think it was, when I discussed it, it was sort of downplayed, and then I found out it had been a real issue for my predecessor. That there had been, Athol has a daily paper, and it had become an issue. So I have fulfilled the requirement. I have a house there, but it is a hard thing. It's not just a mail drop, and I think it was. I'd never been confronted with a residency requirement, and perhaps I didn't understand how difficult it would be to be away from my family as much as I am.
And I can appreciate that, having worked the other end of that spectrum at one point in time, spending 6 months commuting from Vermont back down here at one time, and vice versa. But, you know, why Southampton versus Athol, other than the family? Because, I mean, you've only been there 6 months, 7 months?
Well,
I mean, I understand the residency, but you had to have known that, and there's a certain amount of loyalty that we have to expect you're going to be here.
I understand that.
And, I mean, and your candid admission is you went once for money, you wouldn't do it again, but what if the money was beyond just a bit more money, and, you know, would you go? We've had enough turnover here, we don't need more.
Well, I mean, honestly, this job is, I expect to be taking a pretty substantial pay cut to come here.
Be another reason.
So I do understand that there's the money issue.
But, I mean, you take a pay cut to come here, and then a year from now, one of our larger neighbors pays more money, and you're still in the valley, and you're still with family, and do you go?
If it was Ludlow, I might, but I don't think that job is going to be open for a very long time. But otherwise, no. No, I wouldn't be looking anywhere.
Now, you said you were in Uxbridge, and they decided to go in a different direction. What's the direction they decided to go in that caused you to leave?
There was a tremendous and a very long term, it preceded my tenure there, fight over a new high school. And the board that hired me was seen as being anti-high school. It had voted down putting a debt exclusion on the ballot. And the supporters of the school had pushed very hard to get a different slate of candidates in. And I think that I was, because I had been hired by a board that was perceived as being opposed to the high school, the popular conception was that I was opposed to being against the high school. I was not, frankly. It was built, but I was not seen as a supporter. Ironically, in Athol, we're trying to build a new elementary school, and I've perhaps seen as too much of a supporter of that, but I don't think it's become a political issue.
But did you have a contract in Uxbridge?
I did.
Did you serve out to the end of the contract?
I did.
Oh, okay. And how many selectmen are on the board in Uxbridge?
5.
And how many turned over in any given year?
In the year, 2 turned over, and it was rather an interesting, the 2 that had come in, the two of the 3 holdovers made a motion to renew my contract. It was opposed by the 2 new people, and for several meetings it was deadlocked with 1 member abstaining. And finally, he was convinced not to renew my contract.
That must have been difficult.
Oh, yeah, and I'm sure if you Google it, you'll see that
Well, I just tried to look up your salary, but I couldn't get that. So.
If you want, I can tell you what my salary is in both places.
But it was a difficult time in Uxbridge.
Uxbridge was difficult. They built the high school. They had some difficulties afterwards. There's still, I don't think there was a lot of controversy because they couldn't build the fields, but that was after I had left, and a number of, I think they had 2 failed debt exclusions to pay for the new football field because it was initially built without a field.
I'll ask you the same thing that I asked at least one of the other candidates, because you said it, you know, you stressed that you taking a furlough and, you know, preserving jobs. Why is it that we struggle so hard to protect municipal jobs if they're excess or the capacity isn't there?
Because I don't think the ones we're cutting are necessarily excess. Athol has had a rough 10 years or so. Athol has, incidentally, the 7th lowest average single-family property tax bill in the Commonwealth, and all of the other communities are very small ones with limited services under 2,000. So we don't have a good tax base. We have had cuts, for example, the DPW is about half the size it was 15 years ago. So people are working hard, and unfortunately, they're going to have to work a little harder under the new budget, but we are not overstaffed.
Well, isn't there always some more production that we can get from something, from people?
Well,
More efficiencies?
They always say, let's do more with less, and they've done more with less, but there is a limit. People have a certain expectation of services, and I try to see that that's met.
Now, you're a manager up in Athol, and in Oxford, your last two positions have been manager positions.
They have.
And now we're coming back to being an administrator, where you lack a lot of the authority and direction that you can give from a manager's point of view. How's that going to work?
I was a town administrator for a long time, and in some ways, some of the things that a manager does are my least favorite things. Being the public face of the town, I prefer to defer on the speech making and the political things to the Board of Selectmen. I think that you are the elected representatives, and actually I think I'm thrust ahead of the Board of Selectmen more than I'm comfortable with at times. So I don't mind being an administrator. And I also have a style that's pretty collaborative that works well for an administrator. That's how I learned my profession, as an administrator. So I think even as a manager, I tend to have a collaborative style. I try and build consensus, and I think that's really the key to being a good administrator. You cannot simply impose your will. You have to persuade people, and I think that's the way I like to work.
Now, your degree is obviously not in public administration, which is not necessarily a bad thing from my point of view, but how would you say you've learned the trade, so to speak?
Well, I mean, I've been involved in local government for a very long time. That's how I became an administrator to start with. I was very involved in politics in my hometown. I was on the planning board. I was on the personnel board. I was just involved with town meeting, and when the position came forward, I applied and started as an administrator. There's a number of different ways that people come to public management, and I don't think a public administration degree is necessarily the only one or even the best one.
Now, you said, now your hometown, I assume, is Ludlow, just from the offices you hold.
Yes.
And you still hold, I take it.
I have very recently had to withdraw because when the time limit to move came, I had to change my residency. I'm now a resident of Athol, so I don't serve in those positions. I can't.
But you went into being a town administrator in Ludlow, which is a town of 21,000, which is a pretty good position, or responsible position. You didn't serve as an assistant, or
no?
You went right into the administrative position.
Absolutely, and it was a steep learning curve, I'll tell you. I'm very good at doing research online, so sometimes I would be called upon to do something, and if I had to do it tomorrow, I was up, staying up late out researching what I needed to know from a legal standpoint and from an administrative standpoint. But I don't think I ever fell down and had anything that I couldn't do.
Do you think you've mastered the job at this point?
I think I have. I've been doing it for rather a long time.
Well, I'm actually going to combine two questions. What is your style in dealing with personnel and labor relations, the management style there?
Well, as I said, I like to collaborate with people. I'm not the sort of person who's authoritarian. I like to build consensus. And I think a good example of that is the way I've changed the budgeting process in Athol. My predecessor was a military person, and his attitude, let me put it that way, was that The charter says I do the budget, and I do the budget, and I would actually have department heads, when I came in, I'd say, well, what's your revenue target? And they'd say, I don't know, the town manager didn't tell me. Okay. I like to know, what can you do? What is a reasonable expectation? What did you do last year? Do you think you can project a little more? And if you can't, why not? And we'd come to a target. And I built a revenue projections and a budget around that. So I like to work with department heads. I like to work with the Board of Selectmen. I'm not really tied into, this is my sphere of authority and don't question it. I like to build consensus and to get people to want to work with me, not work with me because that is my authority under the town charter or the town bylaws.
So it seems to me that you are a good listener. Kind of
try
get
and
the
be.
feel of a town and how they run things, and then from there you would...
I try and be a good listener.
Yeah.
My wife sometimes tells me I'm not, but I guess that's part of married life.
Well, I have teenagers, and somebody told me, just keep talking, they're listening. Even though they look like they aren't, they are. Okay, and then the other question I have, well, you have a lot of experience in budgets and preparations, finance, and I was just curious, what's your idea, your attitudes are about really tight budgets and what you can do to help us?
Well, I notice you have very little in the way of excess levy capacity, and I've been less than I'm really comfortable with. I have an extremely tight budget, and I don't know that I'd be comfortable leaving just 5,000 in excess levy capacity because...
Is it that much?
Well, in your last at-a-glance report that I saw, that's what you had, and I think that's a couple of fiscal years back.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine it's much better now, given given what's happened. So I try and work the budget and make sure there's adequate reserves.
Do you write grants?
I have written... I tend to write smaller grants. The larger grants tend to be pretty complex, and in Athol, I've either had the Regional Planning Agency, I've worked with them to get the larger grants written, or I've been using a consultant that I've used both in Ludlow and now in Athol for CDBG grants. I simply don't have the experience to write a CDBG grant, and frankly, probably not the time. It's very specialized, and unless you've done a lot of them, you don't know all the tricks. You want someone who's an expert because there's a lot of money on the line, and you want a successful one.
Does your consultant travel? Would he or she come to Southampton to
Actually,
help
he's
us?
closer to Southampton than he is to Athol.
Oh.
And I don't know if John Ryan, have you heard of him? He's very good. Breezeway Farm Consulting.
Oh.
Everyone's shaking their head back there.
Okay. I've worked with him in Ludlow also. He helped me with our downtown restoration project. We pretty much did the historic downtown and new sidewalks, new pavement, crosswalks, lighting, and it really spruced it up and helped what was a declining occupancy rate. It's still not full, but it's much better than it was.
Right. Great. Thank you.
Hi. Could you tell us what you would consider to be your greatest strength and your greatest weakness?
My greatest strength is certainly financial and legal. I have an MBA with a concentration in finance, and I'm really good at wringing out savings and finding that extra dollar. I've worked the budget in Athol, and I've managed. If you would have asked me when I started, I expected probably at least a dozen layoffs, but I've worked it down to one full-time and one part-time because I've looked for every penny, and I've wrung a lot of savings out of that budget. And I'm an attorney. I've been in the practice of law for more than 20 years, and I know municipal law very well. As a weakness, my background is not, some town administrators and town managers come from a planning background. I'm not strong in that area.
And can you tell us about a specific time when you've had to support a decision that you didn't completely agree with?
Well, that's happening to me somewhat now. We have quite a bit of free cash, but it has been the tradition in Athol not to use free cash for operating budgets. So I will be laying at least one person off, but I will be putting probably $250,000 in free cash into the stabilization fund. I don't know how that's going to go over at town meeting because it is an open town meeting. I don't know if those employees will be present, but it has been a decision. I would have been willing to use a little bit more free cash in this year's budget because I think we can support doing that next year. Obviously, if you have a large one-time infusion of free cash and you use it all in 1 year, you run the risk of not having that available next year. But I think that another 25 or 30,000 would have made for a budget that would have left services whole without really stressing next year. But the Finance Committee was not supportive of it, so I built a budget around their recommended free cash number.
Michael, do you have any questions for us?
Yes, well, a couple. First, I saw that you had approved a roofing project for the schools. Would that be something that would be on my plate to manage?
Not to manage, but to keep us in the loop. We were just talking about that. It's being spearheaded by Jurgensen or the Times?
It's us. We're the contracting authority. Ed and I are the subcommittee.
Okay.
I did do a project like that when I was town administrator in Ludlow, and it was actually 4 schools. It was about a $2 million project. Initially, at town meeting, it had been a $2 million project to do portions of schools at 4 different schools. And honestly, I looked at it, and it was, I think, something that I considered a great success because I really went back to the drawing board. I brought in a roofing consultant. They had initially wanted to do a 3-ply built-up roof. The roofing consultant looked at it. We went back to the drawing board. We put a membrane roof on. We did the $2 million project for $1.2 million, and we had enough left over to put an intranet among the schools and the town building with the excess money.
So what's it, how much is it now?
Down to 900,000.
922?
Right.
Well, this is a number of years ago. You could do 4 schools for 1.2 back then.
This is, we have 1 school, and the roof is 20 years old from the original rehab of it 20 years ago.
I think Mike was on the board, the building committee.
I was on the building committee, yes. You don't have to rub it in. So we're redoing the whole roof for about, the original estimate I think was 1.5 or 1.7 million, but the bid came in at 900,000. We're getting a 55% reimbursement from the state school building.
From MSBA. I do have experience with 2 projects with them, and certainly I know, I've been there many times, so I do know the process with MSBA. The other question I have is, frankly, going into Athol, I knew all the issues because there's a daily paper there, so I just went and looked through back issues, so I knew what the issues I'd be seeing going in. I went back a few months and I knew what was going on, but there isn't a lot of information on Southampton. So what are the big issues that would be on my plate when I started?
Fire chief.
Yeah, the fire, we're looking
Fire,
to...
public safety complex.
Safety.
The roof. The budget.
The budget, and then
Money.
the budget.
Printing press in the basement that needs to start turning out some dough.
It's a constricted, it's a choked community. It's, and this is my opinion, is that, when Prop 2.5 passed, back in the 80s, it was a small town of, what, 1,500? Donna, 1,900? And it's ballooned, and, services go up by 30%, cost for this goes up by this, everything goes up more than the town can really afford based on 2.5+ new growth. And I think the town has really been choked for the past 10 years that, we're just trying to rub dimes and nickels together to get things paid for, when maybe they have to really look back at where the thermostat was set back in the 80s with the growth in the town, so we're sort of really kind of squished. And we're a small town, we're surrounded by 3 cities, and we have all the stuff that happens in those 3 cities flow through this town, and all the issues that go with cities, and it's really a town that's being squeezed, and I think it's a crucial time for this town to have a vision of where we're going to be in the next 5, 10, 20, 50 years, and being surrounded by 3 cities. And we just recently came and approved the master plan, which Hank Barton was the chair for that, right? That was like a 3-year project, so we have a master plan now, and hopefully it will guide a vision for where this town is going to grow over the next 20 years or so. It's trying to do as much as possible with no money at all, basically.
Do you have anyone that actively works on economic development? And would that be something that would be on my plate also?
We have very little, I don't want to say opportunity for economic growth, but we have 2 commercial zones, if I remember correctly, and 1 industrial zone that's not buildable. And that was part of what the master plan revised and looked at. The only commercial land property zoning we have is at the Easthampton end and right at the center.
Yeah, we have no sewer.
We have no sewer.
That's why it's not buildable?
And the industrial zone was set up in the 60s or 70s, and it's almost all ledge.
Okay.
I was going to say that what we do have is community, and some of the best schools in the area, and some of the best people in the area, and we take care of each other. And I'm really proud to live in Southampton. I grew up in Holyoke near the reservoirs. My backyard was the reservoirs. I was really lucky, but I moved here because of the school system and because of the community. And it's, it takes a village. Well, in the street I live on, we have parents, we all take care of each other's children. If my child does something wrong, my neighbor down the street can reprimand my son and I theirs. And we just, and the police and the fire, we just take care of each other. So it is a warm, inviting community. And our budgets are tight, but we have a really good attitude, and the education here is wonderful, so.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that, because that's one thing. Recently we had the volunteer swearing-in ceremony for new volunteers in Athol. And when I spoke to them, I said, geez, the one thing that's really, this town really has is community spirit, because it's not a wealthy town. And we do with volunteers a lot of things that other towns do with paid employees and consultants. When I've had to fill committees and I put the call out, I get volunteers.
Right, we do
and
too.
That's a great thing,
right.
That sort of spirit, because you do not get that everywhere.
Very good. Do you have any other questions?
Maybe she wants to say something.
No, just reposition.
Okay.
No, I think I'm...
Now we're going to turn you over to the audience, if that's okay.
Do you mind if I turn around?
No, please, if you could.
Please do.
We've already sort of set a pattern up.
I don't need sugar, so
Welcome, Mr. Slosik. Thank you for coming out to talk about the job here in Southampton. The biggest question I had in your resume was, goes back to 2008.
Okay.
You held 2 town administrative positions, one in Southampton, one in Ludlow, and both were for a very short time.
Not in Ludlow. I was there for almost 5 years.
From 04 to 08. Thank you. Okay. In Southampton, it was from July to October. So, of course, they're a neighbor to us, and be very interested in your version of what happened there. Why was it so short?
Well, the issue I had in South Hadley is I had been town administrator for quite a while in Ludlow, and frankly, I thought well, the town administrator here must be the same as the town administrator there, and it was really not the same job. It's not the job I thought it would be. It's the town of South Hadley, if you read, and I think they've changed it since. I had spoken to Bob Judge, who was one of my selectmen then, and said, you really need to look at this. The sum total description of the town administrator job in South Hadley was I think it went, the town administrator will perform duties as directed by the Board of Selectmen. So it really didn't say what the town administrator did, and the chair at the time had a very minimal view of what the town administrator should do, and I thought I wasn't doing the job that I expected to have, and it was really more of an executive secretary job, and I said, geez, this isn't working. This is not what I expected it to be, and I think perhaps we should discuss ending the situation. It did not last a long time. For example, we were in the negotiations for the South Hadley landfill. You probably read a lot in the paper about it since, but I was really the lead negotiator for the new contract until I was directed not to attend the negotiation sessions anymore by the chair, and I think that was the thing that really made me decide it wasn't the job for me, because I really love negotiations. So at that point I said, geez, I don't think that we're on the same page as to what I should be doing as a town administrator, and we had a discussion and I left.
Any other questions? Robert?
I'm Robert Floyd, I live right down 50 East Street, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I have curious, what motivated you to become a member of Mensa?
My daughter. My daughter's very, very bright, and I knew I was qualified for it, and I wanted to encourage her to apply, and she hasn't yet, but I wanted to encourage her and do father and son things, so I joined myself.
How long have you been a member?
About 4 or 5 years. I qualified on my SATs, so I could have joined a long time ago. I took those 30 years ago, or 30 plus years ago.
Thank you.
John, do you have a question?
Hey.
Good to see you again.
Thank you.
I guess the one thing is, just follow up what we were talking at our original meeting, and I think Mike had the question. If you come here, you would stay here at least 2 or 3 years to give us time to improve the town and not longer. Because I think you were talking about your wife likes the community, she works in Ohio, and this is part of your overreaching community. And I think that was a little unsettled when Mike asked questions, so I just wanted to bring
Well, it's a quality of life decision, and it's something I think that, as I said, I'm not making this move for money. It's for my quality of life. My wife is nearby, and we've discussed this. So yeah, I would expect to stay. Certainly, moving around frequently is not something that improves your quality of life. It's nice to be somewhere where you're happy and in a job you enjoyed. I had that in Ludlow, and I will regret that move to my dying day.
Jackie says we have a great community, so it's a good place to be.
That's right.
Any other questions? Eileen? Vicki? Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Barbara, the director of the library, and I'd like to know what you think the value of the libraries and
I think libraries are very valuable, and I don't know if you know about the project we have in Athol right now. We have a historic Carnegie library, and we got a grant from the library commissioners, so we're in the midst of building a pretty substantial expansion. Now, that's made it a little difficult with my budgeting, because I've had to look very hard at various municipal budgets, but one that was pretty much sacrosanct was the library budget, because in order to get our reimbursement for the $4 million, we have to remain certified. So I pretty much had to hold that aside and make sure we maintained our certification. But in general, I try and preserve the library services because a lot of people rely on it.
Any other questions? Mike, Jackie, Liz?
No.
Michael, do you have any other questions for the town or for us?
Well, just in general, what do you think that the town is looking for in a town administrator? I try and be approachable. I try and maintain an open door policy with citizens. And in fact, I can't recall any time that someone has come to my office, even in busy times, near budget times, near town meeting, that I have not taken the time to speak to a citizen or address their complaints or concerns. The phone on my desk is a direct line. I don't filter through an admin. I talk to the people who called me, and I hope that's something you value in a town administrator or a town manager. I don't really have any other questions for you.
Well, Michael, thank you for coming by. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. Good job.
Nice meeting you.
Good meeting you.
Excuse me, sir. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I forgot my glasses at home.
I think as Michael's leaving, I'd like to open up for open time for the public, if John will close the door over there.
Really?
It's not lockable, it's not going to lock. So any comments, open time for the public for tonight's events? Yes, sir.
I found this process very interesting. My initial reactions are, I think that Mr. Manzi was very impressive. However, I just don't see him staying here very long. His roots go very deep in the film. His family, at least at one time, owned a retail store there. He has a real estate interest. He has indicated that he would live here during the week. And I don't know how you can have two residents for $60,000 a year. It just seems to be a very difficult choice to make. Am I speaking out of turn here?
No. I think it would, and I think that's what we want to hear tonight from the public, because we'll be discussing this more tomorrow night, if I may say my piece.
Yeah, so is this okay?
But I don't think we should express our opinions at this
No,
time.
I'm listening, I'm just listening.
I didn't know if you were...
No,
I just
making an appropriate comment.
No, I feel constrained to say something here and now.
Mr. Slosing seems like an incredibly nice man, very gentle, good man. I would reserve judgment on that because I really don't know what his qualifications might be. There's something in me that tells me you need somebody with a lot of energy. And I'm not really sure that he would have that kind of dynamism. With respect to Mr. Clement, I am really concerned about some of the things that I read in vetting him, especially the statement about not being able to work well with a mature workforce. My past experience as a manager, I believe in just saving every worker you can, working with them, and only after everything else has failed, then you have to make the bitter choice of firing somebody. I guess I'm sort of responding to something too. I don't fire people because with the National Labor Relations Board, I have hundreds of cases a year of people who lost their jobs. It's a devastating thing. So I like somebody that has patience to work with somebody and give them a chance. And would be less willing to say, I'd fire him, I'd fire him, I'd fire him. Because I don't think that's being a good manager. Being a good manager is you say thank you when somebody does something well. If they do something poorly, you say, I think we've got an issue, can we work on it? You work with them, and just absolute last resort, you would terminate them because you're dealing with people. But those are my general observations.
Anybody else? Robert? Sir?
Again, John Sheehan, Pomeroy Meadow Road. I agree with Jim's comments, and so I don't want to drag this out too long. I have been involved over the years hiring many people, interviewing many people, being on search committees. My bottom line, and I'll explain why, is I think the town should reopen the whole bidding process. I know it'd be an...
Can I kill you?
I know it'd be an aggravation. However, it's a lot bigger aggravation if we hire a person who's only going to be here a short time, and then we have to do it all in a year or 2 years and go through the whole process again. Out of the three, the only one I think impressed me as far as being capable of administering the town here would be William Mancy. However, I agree with Jim that he would be short-term. I think that Mr. Phelan put his finger on it right away, and you did too, Doug, pointing out it's coming from an ocean to a little pond. He's not going to swim around here too long. Plus, he would only be with us Monday through Friday for the most part. He said if there were big things, he would stick around. However, to me, that's keeping 1 foot here and 1 foot in Methuen. If the screening committee and the board decide to go ahead with him, I would strongly recommend doing a strong background check. Some of the things that came up, as far as personnel issues, managerial ability, and I'm sure that the screening committee has a list of contacts in Methuen. I know I have one who's, done every job in Methuen, and very highly visible citizen who I'm sure, I haven't talked to him, but I'm sure he knows Mr. Monsey well.
Very good. Any other comments?
Can I just add something?
Yes.
I would urge you all to read the Civil Service Commission's report regarding the incident with Chief Solomon. I don't have the website with me, but I think you could probably look it up.
What was the police?
It's 125 pages long.
What was the police chief's name again?
His last name was Solomon.
We have that.
Do you have it?
We have it available to us. We haven't seen it yet, but it's available.
It's 125 pages long, but if you start at page 95, that's good.
Good to have
a lot of the political...
the abridged version. Is that the Cliff Notes?
Is set forth. But I think that, and I'm not saying it's necessarily bad or good, but Mr. Manzi, I think, has been found to have a somewhat fiery type of management style, which in the city might go well. I'm from Buffalo, and everybody else there. But I don't know if it really goes well in, like you're saying, a community that's close-knit, and also I think there's a thing that if you've been a mayor, it's very hard to then take this position when you don't have authority. I know my dad owned his own drugstore, and when he sold it, he went to work for somebody else, and he just couldn't make the transition.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask that we have that available to us, at least from page 95 on, we get sent out to us for our review?
Sounds like a plan. All right, any other comments? Vicki?
I guess Clement, however he pronounced his name, he seemed to have jumped around a lot as much as he had the experience in those different jobs of this job. He jumped around a little too much, and it seems as if it were, he wasn't telling you the whole story about why he jumped around a lot. To me, it almost seemed as if there were personality issues, and that they didn't necessarily like how he did it, or he didn't like it, so he just gave up right away, which I don't think he wants someone that kind of just gives up after 2 or 3 years. I mean, obviously people are going to have hardships in their lives and they can't find a job and whatnot, but he seemed to just jump around a little too much.
Any other comments? John?
Yeah, I'm Linda Summers, Helen Drive. I was, I guess, most favorably impressed with the third gentleman because of the legal and financial expertise he could bring to the job. I think that's what this town needs right now.
We're not getting sued. Are we still, are we in lawsuits these days? No.
Got them all.
Got them all. So far.
Yeah.
At one time, we had like 3 lawsuits going on one
But
time.
I think that kind of professionalism would be very useful in a small town that's undergoing a great deal of change rapidly. I would also think we shouldn't get too hung up on somebody staying for years. I'd rather see somebody with some talent and who can affect positive change be here for 3 or 4 years than somebody who's just filling a seat for 20. I'd concentrate on the talent.
Yeah, I think if you look at town administrators in general, they kind of bounce around every
That's right.
few years, and, you know, we spent a ton of money to do this. How much money did we spend on this one?
We didn't spend much on this.
Right. So it didn't really cost us any money to do this, which is good. It did take some effort to go through this whole process. I mean, there was some advertising with the position and whatnot like that.
It's been a lot of work for some people.
Yeah, and I truly appreciate it. But we didn't spend, like, when we did the fire chief, when we hired the full-time fire chief, we spent $25,000 for that process, to hire MRI out of New Hampshire to go through this whole process, and they had a whole kind of evaluation set up. Was it set up here? But Norris, set up at Norris, where they went through drills and scenarios with all the candidates. It was quite extensive. So even though it was appropriate for that, we're going to do things maybe a little differently. But I think looking at getting somebody who may only stay for a short period of time, I'm kind of okay with that.
Well, this is a small town. A lot of people, particularly younger people, would tend to get the experience under their belt and move on. These gentlemen, I think, are probably less likely to do that, being middle-aged. But I still, ultimately, I think it's the expertise and the professionalism that you should be looking for.
You can only assume they're middle-aged.
I know middle-aged.
I keep fooling.
It's a sliding scale. John, did you have a comment?
So I had three questions, I got a fourth one. We're not getting paid for that? Thanks for bringing that up.
What a disappointment.
Mr. Clement, I didn't like his interview at all, so from my point of view, I don't think he's a viable candidate, in my opinion. Mr. Slazak, I had the opportunity of spending a good 2 hours with him in person and on the phone outside of the committee beforehand, because he was very much interested in learning about the town, making sure it was a proper fit. So I actually met him, on my personal time after work, and he just wanted to talk about the town, ask questions. So I think he's quiet, but he's very much into knowing what's going on, how it's going on. I don't think we need a gangbuster personality. So I liked him a lot. Mr. Manzi, my concern, he can do the job. Dick Gibson was one of the candidates, but he got the job in Beckett, so he pulled back. But he's a big town mayor. Would he fit here? I think he has the talent to implode himself and use that talent. And my other concern was, would he stay long?
What do you mean by implode? What do you mean by...
Well, he has all this talent and he's doing these big things, all the powers. I think he could take his talents and bring it inward to be a town administrator rather than thinking that he's a mayor in a small town.
Okay.
I think he could work with the board. The idea of how long would he stay was my big concern. But I'm the chairman of a board of directors for a 400-plus member nonprofit based in Amherst. And we had a very poor executive director, a little over 2 years ago, really took the place and ran it into the ground. And we hired somebody from Boston, from the state of Massachusetts, from the executive branch, and her husband owns a law firm in Boston, he's a partner. And she committed to 2 years of being out here, living out here Monday through Friday. She just came up to her 2-year anniversary and said, I'm not able to stay on because I want to go back. And we're doing a 6-month transition period. But I got to tell you, that 2 years she took the place and turned it on its head. And it's now, instead of having a deficit, it has a profit going forward of probably $1 million this year. And we went from under 100 members to over 400 members based on the way she could market. She had contacts all over the place because she was a state employee. She got hired under, before Patrick, whoever that was, I forget now. But 2 years of her, I wouldn't change it for the world. So I think Manzi could be that type of leader, change leader. So if he stayed 2 or 3 years, I think we would be in a great place.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, when we interviewed him, Mr. Manzi, yeah, he said that, because we'd asked him, about living so long, the commute away from here, and he said that he and his wife would love to move here.
Was it Manzi or was it?
No, I thought it was, they wanted to move to the Amherst area,
Yeah,
just closer to this.
Excuse the expression, the artsy one,
Right.
and she liked this type of
Right,
community,
right.
And I don't know if he said they would move into Southampton or
But no,
closer.
but in the community, in Western Massachusetts.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
During his interview, though, well, as you probably know, he said he would have a residence here and a residence there. Right.
Probably in the interim, seeing how he liked it, I would think. I don't know, because he never stated that when we interviewed him. He just said it.
Fleshed out.
Yeah.
Would you want to live in Methuen, or would you want to live in Southampton?
Southampton.
Who, me?
Any logical person would make the choice,
He's offering to the job.
Yeah, are you busy?
I guess what I'm getting at, if we had somebody dedicated for 2 or 3 years, Monday through Friday, it's,
Right.
like Linda was saying, it's somebody that puts change, good positive change into the town.
Donna?
Well, I was just gonna say too, the Monday through Friday thing, even when Diana was here, she didn't live in town, she was still, half an hour, 45 minutes away. So really, she commuted every day, but she wasn't here on the weekends. I don't know why you guys are hung up on the weekend thing, I guess, because I don't come into town hall on weekends, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I drive by a million times.
Who
So-
wants the weekend?
What's right? No, I didn't. It wasn't something I brought up.
It was me, and I'm asking you have an emergency question.
Oh.
I think if there was if he had a place and he was here during the week, and we had a week where we had no power for a week again, or if there was a reason he had to be here, and he had an apartment or whatever, then I think he would be here.
Mike, you can stay at your house.
All right, we have to sort of wrap it because we still have business to do tonight. Is there any other comments from the audience? Eileen?
Can I just ask a procedural question?
Yeah.
Because I believe the way it was set up in the paper is tomorrow you're going to come back and deliberate.
Yes.
Well, a question is, and Jackie was there, at the committee, do you want to deliberate in executive session and kind of put your 1, 2, 3 choices and then have references checked before you announce? Because if you announce this person's our choice, then the references don't. You gotta go to the second person, or would you rather?
Well, John, that's a good question. I think when we were doing the fire chief, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, we did that in exec. I thought we did, because we were talking about people,
I thought when we narrowed it down, but
I can't recall.
I think when we get to the finalists, it opens.
Okay.
That's that's just my opinion, and it's a good point, John, and maybe we should, what do we got tomorrow posted?
You had the option to go into an executive.
Tomorrow?
But you didn't post it.
We didn't post
That's what I was gonna say,
it.
we
So we
didn't
can't
post
do it tomorrow if we decide to do an executive.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable talking in public.
But we're not going to make it public, our decision tomorrow night. We're just going to discuss.
That was the plan,
We'll make a decision tomorrow.
Gotta make a decision sooner or later.
Yeah, we have to wait to make a
I think that's a critical point, though, checking out references
Right.
and having a conversation, not getting a letter, having a conversation with references and not just one.
Because you're making a decision on pretty much a very truncated interview process.
Eileen, what's the skinny on doing executive?
Can't do it.
What's the law on doing executive? We didn't post an executive.
Can't do it.
We cannot go into executive?
You don't have to post an executive.
Yes, you
You
do.
don't have to
Executive?
post, you're the only, you started that practice 5 years ago. Before then, you never posted an executive session.
We always post. Oh, no, you don't.
Only recent, for all those years, you've
Yeah,
Yeah, we got the newer open meeting law, which gives us some fits and starts.
But you know you need to go into executive session sometimes until you get to that point in the conversation.
Yeah, I know you don't want to put this off, but from my limited experience on some committees in Northampton, I found that the open meeting law sometimes really interferes with a total, I don't want to say candid, but what I'm trying to say, you're talking about very personal information about a person. And I don't know if, everybody should, if that's really good for the whole public to know. And if there's this personal information, I would urge you to do it in executive session with, with the references, and then come back.
And you're not going to
I
do
mean,
it.
just because it's involving personnel matters, private matters.
You could do it if you want to do an executive session, then the thing to do is to do it next Tuesday night on. We were just going to miss a meeting too, huh?
Do we have an agenda set for next Tuesday?
No,
We don't.
It was an off week.
It was our first off week in 7 months.
Guess what? Well, I guess, your point's well taken, John. I would like to be able to talk in exec, but the other side of the coin is I'd like people to understand my decision-making. And I think when you have a discussion in public about these types of things, then, the public gets an understanding why McDougal made a decision that he did, instead of just the vote. Do you know what I'm saying?
Can't you talk in executive session, get your references and all that, then have the final discussion out public?
How about somebody call town attorney tomorrow, ask them the best way to go about this, is whether it's executive or open, and then push it off at least a week until...
Okay.
Yeah, because we have to do background checks anyways.
Well, I'm saying, one, do you do the checks now on all three candidates, or do we select one and do the checks on one candidate as opposed to all three, and see which way he thinks it's the best way to go to avoid any possible litigation in the future?
In the past, you picked your one candidate and you do the background that way.
No, I don't know whether that's the right way. I think I'd like to talk to Joe.
Do you ordinarily check references before you get to the final decision making?
I would have thought we would.
I mean, if you have top two, for instance, you could check references, and that may help you make...
But that means we can't select the top one, we can't pick the top two until next week.
Well, can we rank them without discussion, and then...
And anything you do here is
rank them tomorrow night without you just saying, this is our ranking, blah, blah,
And
blah.
you're gonna have to
and then-
make minutes, and those minutes become subject to an open meeting law.
No, I mean, in the open, but
Yeah, but I'm saying,
just trying to get the process continuing on.
Isn't the only basis for an executive session in a situation like that because you're talking about personnel issues?
Right.
And so it's not a matter of trying to hide anything from the public, everything will be forthcoming, but just for the dignity of the candidates.
that's not a good enough reason for the open meeting law, for executive session, for their dignity.
Well, if it's a personnel matter, you're talking about,
Yeah.
where's my, I don't know. Where's the cheat sheet?
Yeah, so, I mean, things kind of changed recently with the open meeting laws. We used to have a cheat sheet, and I think that's edited it.
You can't say anything about a person's character publicly?
Yeah, that's why the only reason you may want to go into executive session.
Right, I mean, isn't there a law that you cannot say anything about a person's character
Discuss
in public?
reputation, character, physical condition, mental health.
I mean, to me, I almost felt awkward
I know, right?
doing this in the...
I know.
Because, I found interviews, I don't know, 100 people in my 35 years.
We want your number, we're gonna hire you. You want to be on the fire chief one?
I put in an application.
Thank you.
consider or interview applicants for employment by a preliminary screening committee, which we would not be. If the chair declares that an open meeting will have a detrimental effect in obtaining qualified applicants, this shall not apply to any meetings regarding applicants who have passed the prior preliminary screening.
So we missed that. Might have to be done in open.
That would be I'm a quick reading, and that's number 8. That's the only one that seems to apply, and you're beyond that.
Does it make sense for them to say check references on all 3 before you make your decision? And that keeps you above the board?
You could do that and then not, but then you're not going to be able to consider anybody until the references come back, and then have a public meeting after that comes.
It's been 2 years.
The problem is sending people out to do check 3 sets of
But you can also hire a company. At UMass, we hire a company.
I like that idea.
Pardon?
I like that idea.
Yeah, and they don't tell us the criminal records or anything. They tell us if they pass the reference check and all the spots along the way, if they pass that. They won't say they had a drug issue, they'll say they didn't pass on this issue. You know?
I wonder how much that service costs, because then we got to go out to bid.
But then also, you don't get that, I mean, when we discussed it as a committee, you know, we talked about getting a couple people and going out to that community where, and having face-to-face conversations with people for references, not just someone calling someone that they listed, because you know if someone lists someone as a reference, they're going to give a good reference.
The one person you don't want to talk to.
So actually going to that community and being able to talk to people directly, and you're not going to get a sense by hiring a company as you would doing it, you know what I mean? Like,
I think I'm going to disagree a little bit if I can, because if somebody comes to me from somebody somewhere in Eastern Mass and says, John, I want to talk to you about, you know, this person, were they a good person? And they're putting this on the record as a reference. They're going to go back to the select board and say, well, John Martin said, you know, I'm not telling them anything. Where a company that you hire, they're professionals, they get a release from the company. The way we do it, they get an email release, and then they're able to go out and check this, and the employer will give them information.
And what's wrong with doing that? And then if we like somebody or have a question, sending someone out to do that.
Oh, absolutely, but I think you're only going to get the positives.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I'm saying have someone check the backgrounds on a thorough database searching and that sort of thing. I'm assuming that's what they do. And some probably interviewing, but then if we got a vibe that we wanted to go further, then going back out to do that.
How about we do this?
Story and employment as well as personal.
How about we do this? Do we have references yet on these candidates?
Some came in with references.
All right, why don't we, you know, at least get all the references from the 3 that we talked to tonight. That's a start. We get that database. As for going with an outside company, I'm sort of ambivalent, because I really didn't want to spend any cash.
That's money well spent, I think.
Well,
you're going to find it, and I'm not saying you're going to, but you might find a criminal record from California in the 1970s or...
Well, remember, a quarry check is just in Massachusetts.
I know, but they may go further. A private agency may go further. I would make a motion that we investigate hiring a private service that maybe John can give us a name or something.
Yeah, I mean, Hire Right's the company we do. I can look at it and see what they would charge and everything.
What do they charge usually, basically, ballpark to recall? Because if it's under a certain amount, it doesn't have to go out to bid.
It doesn't go on my budget when I hire somebody. Overhead budget.
Sorry, Jack.
I was just going to say.
I tell you what, I'll make believe I'm hiring them and put them through the process. That's not a TV, is it?
Rebecca's right behind you, federal agent.
No, it's just, I was trying to keep the cost down, but we have, so you want to hire somebody, but you don't know who you want to hire.
Well, I make a motion we delay the process and we
Yeah, how are
could...
we gonna pay for that?
Reserve fund. I'll make, you know.
Mr. Finance is right there.
All right, we got a second.
We've got much money left, so.
Buy the fire hose.
All right, so we'll go that route. So those in favor?
Well, I'm only suggesting at this point in time, we investigate the process. I like the process. I would be in favor of the process if the price was a reasonable number that we
Let me see
could...
if I can get a hold of the company tomorrow, get a ballpark figure, email you folks, and let you know what it is, and you guys can make the decision.
Just to be clear, you got a motion in a second.
No, if it's under $5,000, it's...
Technically, you should get 3 quotes, small business practice, and then over 5,000, you need a contract, you actually need a contract.
Right.
But we can get through...
You can do quotes between 5,000 and 25,000, you do.
But you have to have a contract.
Right. But you can do telephone quotes and that.
Yes, but you have to have a contract.
3
You have to
quotes,
sign a contract.
you gotta ask for quotes, you don't have to give it.
Right, you have to ask for it.
So you gotta ask for it.
You're the procurement, and you know.
That's what I said.
You gonna
second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Passes.
Audience, does this make tomorrow night unnecessary now?
Yeah, probably.
It makes, it seems to eliminate tomorrow night as a meeting.
You have plans for tomorrow night, is that what it is?
No, but I'd like to get out of here.
We don't want to waste
But,
time.
and that makes it next Tuesday night, have a meeting schedule a meeting. You're the chairman, schedule a meeting.
I already said we were going to, didn't I?
So that moves tomorrow night's meeting till next Tuesday.
And book an executive session just for the hell of it, and then so we have it. And then, will we have a list, do you think, I mean, does MMA offer some of that, do you know?
I don't know, we'll find out. We'll make some calls tomorrow. And you want a list of 3 references, self-supplied references, which all good, of course, but
Yeah.
Yeah, well, whatever they gave you.
check with the company we use, Mass, and I'll check with MMA.
But I just also have to pause a minute. I mean, I think Michael and William have already been self-vetted to some degree. And maybe Craig as well, in the sense that they were just recently hired by multiple towns. So just standing back for a second, looks like they've already been vetted in other ways.
But I wouldn't want to buy someone else's mistake.
Well, I'm saying, if there was a Corey check or something else, you figure something
Yeah, you would
would have
assume.
popped up somewhere along the line.
You would assume that.
Just saying that out of common sense, but if you can get that information, John, that'd be great.
I'll get you information, you can decide.
All right. Does anybody know of any other resources to use? All right.
Post tomorrow night's meeting, cancel.
Police station, can't they do some checks
Cancel
too?
tomorrow. Send it
Well,
out.
I think we should use out of town or out of the community.
I was just questioning,
I didn't
maybe
hear.
the police chief, I mean, can't they do some kind of checks?
He would have access to Corey, but not much more than that. Well, he'd have access, yeah, I don't think they can do it, to be honest with you. I don't think they're not supposed to, no.
He was on the committee, didn't he say he couldn't do it?
He said he couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Listening to all of this and contacting companies, contacting you, contacting the 2 or 3 for a quote, and then asking them to get references and sending it in, appears to me it's going to go beyond a week easily.
But to keep it on the burner, I would keep us coming back every week until we,
Yeah, otherwise it just drifts away.
you know,
I understand.
if something else will happen, a tree will fall in Brooklyn and we'll be distracted by something and we won't get to it, but if we
You
keep
can
it,
make a decision pending, pending a positive background check.
I think we could,
I think we should talk to town council, see if we can do this in executive session, if we can, and come in Tuesday night and do our discussions. In the meantime, we can be running background checks and keep the process going forward.
sounds good.
Want to save money, just ask Mr. Slosik. He's an attorney.
He's too close to the situation.
Well, that's just a plus.
We have to move on to other business, because Mike has to get home from Mary. But I just want to thank you for coming out. And how do you feel?
Good job. Yeah, see this person.
What else? There's no second page.
Carly signed it.
So you're gonna send the contract out for review with the...
Yeah, there's the contract for the roof, I'm sorry, thank you, Michael. We see the copy of the contract for
Yeah, okay.
the Norris School roof. I'd like to put off signing the contract until it's vetted by legal, so
Right.
we'll get that out to them.
We should get this too.
Donna, you know the amount is $922,000 and some odd?
22 cents.
But I was told that they're hoping to start before the end of June. I guess I need to know, I actually sent Reggie an email today, but I need to know what else is going to be spent before the end of June, or what is anticipated being spent. So I need to borrow in anticipation of that, so it doesn't show up our free cash. So I didn't know if in the contract it specifies, a payment arrangement, like how much is paid at the start of work, how much is, what the increments are, that kind of thing.
So a payment schedule.
I need to have copies. Well, and I need a copy of the contract too.
Well, we have to have the contracts actually vetted.
But they,
Correct, I need a copy of
for
the
their,
design.
for their purposes, they just need so can we get them a copy of the contract so they each have it?
So we need to have the payment schedule.
With the understanding it may not be the
That's the
final.
whole thing?
Right.
Okay.
And then once it's signed,
Contract sum,
I'm supposed to have copies.
and then...
Yeah, okay.
All right, I think that was the last
No, you
issue.
got the fire chief thing down at the bottom.
Do we have some nominations?
We have 6 nominations.
I had spoken to Dr. Collins about getting somebody from the school involved in the interview committee, and he's checking with the crisis preparedness team to see if there's anyone interested from that board to serve on the interview committee, and I'm waiting to hear back from him.
What do you have for, is it in the agenda?
Yeah, well, I read a list of, there's 6 people that have applied, 2 of which are assistant chiefs, or deputy chiefs in other towns, and cities, actually.
All right.
We have some pretty impressed people on the committee.
So I'm looking for a motion for Vicky Morrow, Patrick.
Well, that gives you an even number. The problem with, if you...
Well, we may have one more person. So it's not a complete committee, or do you want to do the whole complete committee?
How many members do you want on the committee?
Yeah, that's the first question.
I thought we said 7.
It should be an odd number for sure.
5 or 7.
And
We have 6 here. If we get one more, then we'll have 7.
Robert, would you like to be on the fire chief committee?
Thought about it, but I don't know.
Say yes, Robert.
I don't know.
All right, so I'll take a motion to nominate Mr. Floyd.
I would stay on. I mean, you asked the town administrator committee if they wanted to stay on as the screening committee for the fire chief.
Donna, and then
Do you want to be on it, Donna?
Oh, yeah.
All right, then we got 7. Okay? Maybe next time for Norris.
No, they
School.
slow on the
Next
draw,
time.
they lose.
Sorry.
Snooze, you lose.
So I'll take a motion for Vicky, Patrick, this is,
Eli.
Eli.
No.
No, it's
No, Egloff.
Egloff,
Oh.
James Palmero, John O'Shea, Hugh
Scott,
Scott,
and
James LeBrie. There's a motion, call for a motion on those?
so moved.
And Donna Whiteley,
Yeah.
Whiteley, Judd?
Yeah.
Whiteley.
And then,
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any comments about the list? Hearing none, those in favor?
aye.
All right, so we'll have to get in touch with Eileen to get these people signed in.
Reggie is put on the agenda on page 60, is it, of 69, a proposed charge to the committee,
69, page 69.
60 of 69.
So Donna, you're going to be chair? Good.
It's right there.
Well, I'm just going to, okay,
They meet, they form their own committee, they select their own chair.
all right. So do you want me to read this?
Well, I mean, I've read it,
Do you want
yeah.
to read it
Where's the
out
payment
loud?
schedule for the roof? The payment schedule for the Norris roof?
Do you
Yeah.
want to read it?
She can get you a copy of it, or?
And I need the design schedule, the contract for the design schedule also.
Okay, let me see if it's here.
Paid left to pay, because that's what she has to borrow against too.
Right, okay.
Here's the charge. The select board hereby establishes a screening committee to conduct preliminary interviews and to make finalist recommendations relative to the candidates for the position of fire chief. The committee is to be comprised of 7 members now, including, 1 select board member.
Does it have?
Strike that, let's strike that clause.
Can I have that?
Appointments to the committee
put
will
everything
be,
back together.
well, now made, so that strike that second clause, second paragraph. The screening committee shall recommend 3 candidates to the select board as finalists for the fire chief. The recommendation shall be unranked, and the finalists must be uniformly examined before the screening committee makes its recommendation. In carrying out this charge, the screening committee will utilize the position description adopted by the select board on whatever we modified it. To the extent permitted by law, the screening committee will maintain the names and that sort of thing. It is the intention of the select board for the screening committee to function as a governmental body, as that term is defined in Massachusetts open meeting laws. Members of the committee should make arrangements to be sworn into the clerk's office. Select board encourages screening members to familiarize themselves with recent communications from town council relative to the applicability of open meeting law, particularly with respect to record keeping, ability to maintain confidentially of candidates' identities. Copies of the communications will be made available to committee members subsequent to appointment.
Do we have to make a motion for that?
I would think with the modifications as suggested, I would move that we accept that as a charge.
Do we have a second?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Reggie, will you take, she should take charge of nominating or notifying the people, and
Yeah, so do you have a list of, you have that list, okay.
somebody should take charge of setting up the first meeting for them.
Donna, can you help?
Sure. I can get up the list. Maybe if you can just email me the list.
I'll email
everybody.
facilitating, setting up the first meeting and organization. And that they notify them they all gotta come in and get sworn in.
Yes.
All right, anything else on the
Hearing
agenda?
no further business, I'll move to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?